Not only do I not hate Dain, I like Dain. I actually like him. So far, everything that's happened in Onyx Storm has made me like him even more. I'm not ashamed to say it. And you know what? There's a part later in this set of chapters where I got a little heated because they were doing Dain dirty again. And I got real mad. And everyone needs to leave Dain alone.
Oh. Welcome back to the Locked On Fantasy Podcast.
I'm Addison.
I'm Lorraine, and we are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through both shows and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. This was a pretty dense set of chapters. I feel like there's a lot of history involved. It also raised a lot of questions, so I'm back to just thinking real hard. I don't think I had any crazy theories to present in this set of chapters.
No crazy theories, but to be totally honest, guys, my house was hit with the plague, so Lorraine did a lot of the thinking and funking on this episode. I'm here for the color commentary, and honestly, I really couldn't get past Xaden and his poor behavior and decisions in this set of chapters, so you'll quickly see one of us went very scholarly and one of us went very emotional, and I'm here for the emotion.
Yeah, there's a pretty clear delineation, guys. I was like deep in the plot and deep in the history. But hopefully that's appreciated because I'll admit I forgot a lot of stuff. So a lot of this deep diving was for myself too, because I was like, wait, what happened when? And then I was trying to piece together everything. So it was actually good that I did this because I feel better about what I know now. So
Lorraine went deep and I went shallow as hell.
It's still going to be a funny episode though.
Always.
As a quick reminder, we are a spoiler-free podcast. We have only read up to the chapters we are covering and no further, so we have literally no idea what's to come in the rest of the book. With that being said, we will be discussing chapters 13 through 18 specifically. It is likely that references to the previous chapters as well as Fourth Wing and Iron Flame will come up as well. If you are not caught up, then definitely stop here and then come back when you are. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have adult conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. If you are reading along with us, the next week's episode will cover chapters 19 through 24. And second, if you are a fan of our Onyx Storm coverage, then the very best way for you to support us is to leave us a review and share it with a friend who loves the Empyrean series. This helps us find more fantasy book lovers, and continue growing our little book club community. That's all for housekeeping, and now let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report, where Addison will summarize each chapter, and next we will convene a meeting of the assembly, where we will deep dive, analyze, and theorize each chapter. Finally, to end the episode, we will share our favorite moments from the set of chapters discussed. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Happily. Chapter 13. Violet and her squad head to the archives to meet with Jesinia for updates on her research regarding the First Six, the Seventh Den, Wardstone's venin, and basically everything and anything that may help them. On the way, we learn some super important information that is non-mission related. Our boy Riddick hops like a frog. Glad that at least someone is enjoying themselves. They meet with Jesinia and they are in luck because the second tome that Jesinia pulled just so happened to have a prophecy that said when the last Irid hatches and bonds a cadet born of Rider and Scribe, she'll be gifted with 2 signets. Just kidding. After a verbal smackdown on Riddick, Jesinia gives Violet several tomes on Deverelli and tells her that she also noticed several pages missing from General Cadeo's journal after he mentions that one of the Isle Kingdoms may have supported Krovlan during the second uprising. She tells Violet that there is only one scribe who might have the research they need. With a sinking feeling in her chest, she realizes that Daddy Sorrengail's research is still in the general's quarters, and the only person that can help her get it is Dain. 3 days later, back in Battle Brief, things do not get better. Devera informs all the riders and flyers that they have now confirmed that it is likely that both sages and mavens can wield signets, and they will be adding 3 additional classes to their workload. In preparation for Signet versus Signet battles, they will now have a new class with a new instructor. The good news? The new teacher is Lieutenant Xaden Riorson, or should I say, Professor. The bad news? Article 8, Section 1 of the Basgaith Code of Conduct. If you know, you know. Chapter 14. After being dismissed from Battle Brief, Violet quickly made her way through the crowd of cadets to catch up with Dain. Violet gets straight to the point and asks Dain if he will help her steal back her father's research from his father's quarters, and Dain agrees. Xaden enters the chat, and one of the most hilarious and awkward conversations in Basgaith history takes place. Xaden and Violet have broken up? ? Sorta, kinda? Bodhi and Dain nope the fuck out of there for the rest of that conversation, and Xaden tells Violet that he will simply ask Panchek for an exemption. But before Xaden even gets a chance to ask who should interrupt them, none other than Daddy Atos. How is he always there? Daddy Atos shuts down the request for an exemption immediately, but not before Xaden can insult him. At least that isn't against the Codex. The next Monday, Violet is ready to slam her head into a table as Grady and his selected squad assemble to discuss the upcoming mission. Somehow, Grady accidentally forgot to invite Xaden to the meeting, and after a short pissing contest, Grady concedes and he's allowed to stay. But the victory was short-lived because it seems that the only thing everyone can agree on for this mission is that no one can agree on anything. Chapter 15. It was finally time for Violet's squad to attend their very first Signet Sparring class with Professor Xaden. A snarky third year by the name of Lauren stupidly decided to challenge Xaden's abilities, and well, let's just say Lauren fucked around and found out. But the ass-kicking didn't stop there. Without even lifting a finger or breaking a sweat, Xaden handed literally everyone their asses. But it was finally time for Xaden to face off with the one person whose signet could actually kill him, Violet. Chapter 16. Xaden and Violet face off and the world goes dark. Xaden wraps them in the darkness of his shadows, and this scene was equal parts romantic, steamy, and ominous. Honestly, not really sure how I feel about this. The scene ends with Violet releasing a lightning strike and Xaden ending class. The next afternoon, the squad heads to Shantara to worship at their respective temples and then unwind a little at the pub. While they wait for the flyers to return, the squad discusses class the previous day and their worry for Ark and Lynx who have yet to manifest a signet. Once the flyers arrive, they briefly discuss the differences and preferences for the god of war and death near Basgaith, but are interrupted when Dain approaches. Dain speaks to Violet in private and tells her the only way to retrieve her father's research means they'll have to do it alone, leaving Violet with a choice to trust Dain or not. Violet decides to trust him, for better or for worse, leaving her fate to rest in the hands of Dain Atos, which should not be that big of a fucking deal. We will talk about that later. Chapter 17. After listening to the death roll, the squad breaks from formation and Sloane asks Violet if they can talk. She leads them to the Quadrant's library where the two have a heart-to-heart about what happened in the Wardstone chamber. Sloane apologizes and Violet tells her there's no need and that she understands, and it seems like the pair are ready to move forward in their friendship. Sloane then gives Violet a satchel full of books and her father's research that Dain passed on to Jesinia, that Jesinia passed on to Sloane, and Sloane passed on to Violet. But that's where the good news ends. Turns out password protection isn't just for modern times. Violet's father password protected his research, leaving Violet a cryptic note to piece together what the password could be. As the squad makes their way to the pit for Signet Sparring, they discuss what the password could possibly be and get dangerously close to figuring out who Violet's first love was. But mercifully for Violet, it was their turn to take on Garrick. They attack as a squad and do a pretty damn good job of beating Garrick, but are then interrupted with the arrival of Violet's ex, none other than Crown Prince Halden, first in line to the throne of Navarre. Halden makes himself comfortable next to Violet and immediately begins trying to win Violet over with his good looks, charms, apologies, and information. He delivers a missive to her from Viscount Takaris, letting Violet know he has made arrangements for them to meet with the King of Deverelli. But they must first retrieve the Emilian Citrine, which just so happens to be an enemy-occupied territory. The conversation ends when Halden reaches to touch Violet, and he is promptly blasted backwards by a blast of shadows straight into the rock wall. Chapter 18. Xaden didn't kill Halden, but he did let him know in no uncertain terms that Violet was his. An hour later, Violet and Rhiannon sat in Violet's bed and stared at her father's research. AIMSIR, Imsir, a 6-letter word, the name of Lilith's dragon, her first undeniable love. Violet worked up the courage to press the mechanism, and the fandom took in a deep collective breath and exhaled it when she successfully unlocked the journal without ink going everywhere. Rhiannon gives Violet some privacy, and she reads an absolutely heartbreaking letter from her father that also made me physically ill with its lack of detail, but extreme, you must do this or the world will cease to exist energy. She resolves to follow her father's directions, but is interrupted by a seething, jealous Xaden, who is desperate to know if Violet ever loved Halden. Violet reassures Xaden he's the only one for her, and their conversation quickly turns into a spicy, shadowy makeout session. But before things could go any farther, Xaden stops himself and begs Violet to distract him from his insatiable need. So she tells him about her father's research. They agree that no matter what, they will go to Deverelli and begin the search for answers. And that concludes the book report.
Wow, excellent. All right, well, thank you for that. And now let's convene our meeting with the Assembly for our analysis. And of course, we will always start with our overarching thoughts.
First and foremost, we were right about Halden. I just have to say that here. Obviously, this is not an earth-shattering revelation, and it was honestly a little obvious. But damn, it still feels good to be right, because realistically, we will probably be wrong about basically everything else. So, gotta take the wins while we can get them. My second thought, this will shock many of you, because as several of you know, I am a diehard Xaden lover. But in the spirit of honesty that I value on this podcast, Xaden's jealousy story arc and the set of chapters really turned me off. It was just...
Ooh.
I know, I can't believe I'm saying it. It was so macho and over the top, and honestly, it gave me the ick. And normally, I am all about that touch her and die energy. And I don't even mind a little jealousy, right? That's kind of cute in its own way, but I really did not like it. And it did not become more palatable even on my rereads. Because I thought maybe the first time I'd be like, let me process it again. And I disliked it more and more each time I read it. So sorry, Xaden.
See, I interpreted it a little bit differently because I was looking at it through the lens of who Xaden was before he was venin and how he acted around Violet versus how he is now that he's venin, which is still concerning, obviously, because this seems to me to indicate that there is a switch that's flipping quicker. Like, he doesn't have as much control, and I think the control definitely plays into his emotional responses around Violet as well. So that's more of what concerned me, because, at his core, we did not get the ick from Xaden Riorson prior to him being venin.
No.
And now that he is, I'm like, dang it, we're seeing this shift, and it doesn't make you feel very good. But you're remembering who he actually is. I'm not in denial about what's going on with him. Violet is just a little bit, but I'm holding on to my optimism. As you guys know, I'm optimistic in this episode. He's not really like that. He's like that because he's venin.
So I guess what I should say is, I don't like Vaden. I like Xaden.
Yes.
But I'm not here for the Vaden energy.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then the other thing that I was really excited about, but then also we didn't get enough information for me to feel satisfied about it, was obviously finally getting Papa Sorrengail's research, but we didn't even get into it yet. So I was like, dang it, I'm dying to know what's going on in there.
I know. It was so hard to stop. She got it open and I was like, but, I feel like the entire book is like that. We'll just read the whole book in one sitting. So it's gotta cut ourselves off somewhere.
We just got to keep reading. Stay tuned for the next episode, guys. So let's get into the actual analysis, starting with chapter 13. And of course, we have the excerpt. So this was a record from Colonel Lewis Markham, and it states that after failing 3 exams, Jesinia was now removed from the adept path and stripped of all its responsibilities and sacred privileges as of January 15th. Her command has also been transferred to Professor Grady at his request. So typically, we don't know what the dates are for these excerpts, but this event has just occurred in the current timeline of Onyx Storm and foreshadows what Jesinia reveals to Violet in this chapter. Given what we learn in our discussion last episode about other members within leadership and Biscaith being venin or anyone else generally being suspicious, I'm definitely flagging Markham for this because why Jesinia? The obvious answer is her connection to Violet, or that Jesinia is too curious and was getting too close to truths that they didn't want her knowing about. And that's kind of my best guess for why they're trying to kick her out of that path.
I'm going to softly say that I don't think Markham is a venin, but obviously he's suspicious for partaking in the historical cover-up of the events that transpired over the last, 400 years. I think what it really boils down to for me is what Jesinia says in the conversation, that really Markham is just pissed that she, quote unquote, deserted the quadrant. I didn't really think about it until this chapter, but I would be willing to bet that the scribe quadrant is split down the middle on people who are pro-Markham and Navarre versus people who are pro-truth, Violet, Erasure, etc., just like how the Rider quadrant is divided between Navarian riders and Erasian riders. And we've seen how that's impacted the tensions in the quadrant. And so it seems only natural that the most impacted other quadrant would be scribes.
That's a good point, too. We only really hear about the riders, but I guess it would
Yeah.
make sense that similar sentiments probably exist in other quadrants, probably among infantry, too, as well as scribes. In case anyone needed a reminder, I am Team Second Squad, tail section, fourth wing, all day.
All day.
Because I love how Rhiannon, Riddick, and Sawyer will always be there with Violet for everything. The squad heads to the archives to meet with Jesinia, and as they walk, their conversation was cracking me up. We have Sawyer getting shit for waking up early to look presentable for Jesinia. Violet gets shit for her and Xaden fighting like an old married couple. Rhiannon gets shit for her seemingly casual situation with Tara, while Riddick gets shit for bed hopping like a fucking frog. I also love that Riddick mocks Violet when he says, "I'll trust you if you stop keeping secrets. It's my secretive nature that attracted you." Because, oh my gosh, it's so true. Like, that was 80% of Iron Flame with them, and it's hilarious that the whole squad knows all about it.
Yes, I feel like Violet and Xaden are a little bit under this illusion that their relationship and their conversations are private and like people don't really know what's up, and everybody fucking knows their
Everybody
business.
knows.
Everybody
Mhm.
knows. Honestly, it was absolutely hilarious. It was really nice to see the squad have a normal conversation that was just fun and lighthearted and, not about the world
Yeah.
ending. I also have to shout out Rebecca Soler. I probably mention her in every episode. She's the narrator for the audiobook for Onyx Storm and Fourth Wing and Iron Flame as well. And listening to someone actually act out this scene made it 10 times better. It was so great.
Yes.
I loved it.
I loved it too. Something I just thought about recently, though, because as nice as it is that the whole squad is working together, they're in on most things that Violet is doing. The one thing that she still hasn't told them about is Xaden.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's like a big secret
Mhm.
and a pretty
Mhm.
big problem. So I wonder if or when they're going to find out about that.
Well, and it's going to fracture the squad because this is now the second time that she's done this, right? The first time was after the Battle of Ressin. I remember she had that big blow up where she breaks down and almost tells Rhiannon, and then she eventually does tell them. And they had this big heart to heart, and they're like, "We're your squad. We backed you up. You have to trust us." And it's all, yay, hurrah, hurrah. And I feel like Violet got a free pass on that. I get why she didn't want to tell them. But now they've gone through all of these things together, and it's like, you really thought you couldn't trust us? I mean, I get her reasoning, but like, how many free passes is she going to get on this shit?
One can only hope. So, anyways, aside from that, it seems like Sawyer is making some progress on a prosthetic when he mentions that he met with a woodcarver for a fitting.
Sawyer notes that what the woodcarver had available was God's awful, and he says that he's starting to think he should just make something himself. I feel that this is 100% foreshadowing that Sawyer will eventually use his metallurgist signet to craft his own prosthetic. And it seems like whatever Sawyer comes up with will likely be much better than what the woodcarver has.
I hope so. I really like that thought, and I hope he makes something better for himself, because I promise this is not a dig on Sawyer's situation.
It's given pirate peg leg,
Yes,
know?
Yep, that's where
like
I
the
was going,
90s
and I was
cartoons
like,
where it's like a cone with a stick on it. Yeah.
Yep,
and I'm
yep,
like, no,
yeah.
our
And I
boy
was like,
deserves something better. Maybe that's like a millennial thing, like that's our generation thing, because that's immediately the image it evokes. And I'm like, no, we need something better.
Yep, absolutely. On a more serious note, something that stuck out to me was when Sawyer says legacies usually make for stronger riders, and with as much power as you two wield, Melgren will probably escort you both to a temple of your choosing the second you're commissioned. In response to Riddick saying he bet leadership loves that Violet and Xaden are in a relationship together, and my ears, of course, perked up at the legacies make for stronger riders, because now I want to know who else in leadership has kids that are also riders. As far as we know, the only people who we know are legacies right now are like the Sorrengail siblings, Dain. Is there anybody else?
We knew Orly was, but she died in Fourth Wing. She's the one who dies on the gauntlet. She was a legacy.
Right. Maybe Quinn also?
Well, I think it's her great aunt. or something who was a
Right.
writer. Because that's why she has a really powerful signet.
Does that count as a legacy?
I guess it depends on how you define legacy. I mean, I feel like anybody who has a bloodline of writers in your family is probably considered a legacy. It's just how many
Right.
steps removed are you from the most recent writer?
Right.
And when you think about it, of those four, we know that Violet Miriam Brennan's mom was the only one who was a writer. Obviously, their father was a scribe. And for Dain, we of course know his father is a writer. We don't know anything about his mother. My assumption is that she's dead. I don't know if she was a writer or not. I'm going to assume no, or that probably would have been mentioned. But anything regarding Dain's mom is starting to become a question mark for me because there's been a mysterious lack of information regarding her. But anyway, I wonder how many writers in the quadrant have parents that are both writers, and if that also increases the strength of your legacy signet, etc. And so since Violet and Xaden are both writers, I was like, damn, their baby would be like terrifying.
Also, I was like, is this a little bit of foreshadowing for Violet and Xaden getting married or something in the future? Although I have to disagree with Sawyer. Given how things are going, it seems like the last thing leadership wants is for Violet and Xaden to be together. If anything, they're probably scared of them. But it's hard to say for sure when you're also trying to figure out who in leadership is venin versus not. There's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like they mostly hate it. They only want powerful writers that they can control, and they clearly cannot control Violet or Xaden. And they most likely would not be able to control one of their children. And also, like, at the end of the day, who fucking cares? Because they have to get married, get pregnant, have a baby, and then wait 20 years before they can go to the writer's quadrant. And then they have to fucking make it across the parapet, make it through the gauntlet, make it through threshing. Like, the odds of that actually happening, you know, a lot of people die in this series. So
True.
I think the entire fandom was probably screaming when they read this because it does initially seem like some casual joking conversation, but it could potentially be foreshadowing for down the road. I just really don't see Violet and Xaden getting married in this series, especially when you think about the timeline of these books. We're about a third of the way through, and it's literally been like a month. And it seems like the timeline of the books are getting compressed. Honestly, I just don't see them having a baby in a world that's unsafe, that's uncertain. And Violet would actually need to graduate first also. If they do end up getting married and or having kids and all that, I think it would be like 8 years later in the epilogue kind of situation.
Ooh, yeah, that's fair. I could see them maybe getting married, but definitely not the kids thing. Do they even have time to do that? Seriously, it seems like they got things to do, problems to solve. So,
well, right now they can't even get it on to make a baby because Xaden loses control every time. So that definitely ain't happening.
So in response to Sawyer's comment, Rhee also jokes that she was surprised Melgren hadn't already made an arrangement for them for the future in hopes that your kid will be the next one with battle foresight in 20 years. And I was like, add it to the list. Will we get another signet that involves foresight, either in relation to battle or just generally speaking? Alternatively, does Melgren have a kid that we don't know about?
I would be shocked by that. I think we would definitely know if he had a kid.
Would we? I don't know.
Well, you know what? Never say never, because at this point, I know nothing.
True, yeah.
I didn't think about Melgren's signet in this context until now, but really what Melgren's signet is precognition, but it's just battle specific. So maybe this is what our signet will be, is a precognition, battle, something signet. It also calls into question, would we need that? Probably not, unless something's going to happen to Melgren. Based on what we know about Melgren's character, his signet was extremely rare. Like, it was like basically unheard of and catapulted him up in the ranks because who can beat that fucking signet? Nobody, right?
Yes.
And so I think kind of the sentiment of this series is that nature likes things in balance. And there's sort of gods or whatever magical, mysterious, natural forces that balance things based on the need. So do we really need two precognition battle signets at the same time? Probably not. But if Melgren dies soon, I don't know.
We've also briefly mentioned the possibility of precognition in association with Violet for her second signet. So there's also that realm. While we're talking about Melgren as well and his signet, I will say the one limitation that I've been thinking about is like the whole situation with the rebellion relics. What is it about the rebellion relics and having 3 of them that counters that? There has to be something tied in with that. And there's a reason that he cannot see it. We just don't obviously know why yet. But
well, I mean, yes and no. I think my understanding is that it's in relation to the rune that Colonel Mari made for all of them that gave them the rebellion relic. But see, as we're talking about it, in the beginning of this series, you're like, oh, it's so great that Melgren can't see them because it helped hide Erasure. It helped hide a lot of the revolution activities. But now that everyone's on the same page, now it actually seems like a problem because Melgren can't see the outcomes of battles with the venin because the marked ones are always going to be involved. And so now this is actually a pitfall, and it's really hurting the overall cause when you think about it.
As a small world-building note, we also get a mentioning of a new god, Loyal, and she is the goddess of love. So next, the squad arrives at the archives, and Jesinia meets with them.
We talked about this in the last episode about how I felt so smart for being like, ooh, irid, must be short for iridescent. And then I quickly realized everyone figured that out pretty much immediately. But Riddick and I are twins because he says, do you guys think it's short for iridescent? And all three of them are like, yes, obviously. And I was like, leave my boy alone. He figured it out and I'm proud of him.
He got there eventually. I thought it was interesting that even amongst the scribes, there's some passive aggressiveness going on. You have those scribes getting in Jesinia's way, giving her dirty looks and everything. And I just assumed that scribes would be peaceful, but they're definitely not. They're just as aggressive.
Petty as hell. That's right.
I know.
Petty.
Yeah. But I also got super excited when Riddick announces he's petitioning Grady to be on the quest squad. We don't touch base on this again within this set of chapters, but I really hope he gets to go. And I actually think he might get to based on chapter 18's excerpt. And I'll talk about it when we get there.
I totally agree. I just don't buy that the current quest squad that Grady has selected is going to stay. Ain't no way Violet is going to be separated from Mira or her squad. And I just don't see how Rebecca Yarros could write a sizable chunk of the book without a lot of our beloved characters. No one wants to read a book about fucking Aura Binehaven. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely not. GTFO. Yeah. She's so annoying. I don't like her. But anyways.
I don't think we're supposed to.
I know. Also, bless Sawyer's romantic little heart. Him and Jesinia just have the sweetest relationship with him, learning to sign and everything. And it's just so cute. Jesinia also announces that she'd been kicked out of the Adept program as punishment for her desertion back in Iron Flame after she failed some rigged tests designed for her to fail. As a reminder, the Adept path for scribes is the hardest of all degrees and one that every curator of the scribe quadrant has to have. Markham is the current curator for the scribe quadrant. Violet thinks that she knew Jesinia would be punished for choosing Erasure, but never imagined he'd expel his brightest scribe from the path where she's so desperately needed. This obviously rings alarm bells. Why kick the most competent scribe out unless you're worried that she's getting too close to something? I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, and they believe that it's for desertion, but I don't know. A curator holds a lot of power since they oversee and manage all of the historical records, documents, and written artifacts, and they get all of that information first and foremost before anybody else. So I'm really suspicious of Markham. Obviously, I don't have a lot of evidence to support that feeling, but I'm going to say yellow flag up right now, I guess.
I think it's totally possible there's more to it. I also just wondered if it was a little more of a generic dislike for anyone they can't control. If there's anything they ever want to hide from the historical record in the future, they know Jesinia will not play ball on that. So they'd probably rather have someone who is more of a puppet, to be honest.
That's true.
And it ain't going to be our girl.
Also, there's only 2 excerpts between Fourth Wing and Iron Flame coming from curators themselves, because I was going overdrive on all the background research here. So I started looking up if we've heard anything about curators in the past anyway. So one of those excerpts discusses how the Green Dragons offered their ancestral hatching grounds in the Steel Ridge Mountains so that the wards of Navarre could be woven by the first 6 of Biscaeth. The second one was from The Journey of the First 6, which is also a second-hand account that was translated 3 different times, with the third time resulting in this account being redacted for, quote, academic consumption. The account discusses how they pushed the wards past what was thought possible and what they believed would be sustainable, thus redefining where the borders of Navarre would be? So I'm like, both of these topics are of high interest and security.
Well, it's also interesting that we're talking about scribes because we know from a lot of the excerpts where it says recovered correspondence transcribed by Jesinia were curator of the scribe quadrant. So we know at some
Yes,
point in the
yeah.
future that she does become curator, which is great because that's really what we need is someone who is
Yes.
honest and accurate in the scribe quadrant. Something else I thought was really interesting is that I feel like I've been so focused on what the scribes left out that I haven't really stopped to contemplate what is still in. If Jesinia progressed on the adept path, she would probably have access to basically everything, and maybe there are records that would be damning in other ways they don't want a quote-unquote traitor to Navarre to access. So that may also have been some of their motivation in taking her off the adept path. Lorraine and I were talking about this before the episode. We'll talk about it probably forever. She and I both feel there is this undercurrent that the government of Navarre is hiding a lot more than just the fact that venin exists. So this would seem to sort of support that idea, like they have more secrets than just venin, and they don't want anyone near that information that they can't control.
Yep. Conspiracy alarm bells. So Violet is less optimistic, but Jesinia is actually okay with no longer being on this path because she's left on her own with a treasure trove of royal tomes no one has read in the last 400 years, as well as Lyra's journal and 600 years of personal accounts.
I absolutely love Jesinia's response here. I don't think we've ever really seen a sassy Jesinia, but I am totally here for it. The way she was like, look at me suffering. And I was like, I love you so much, Jesinia.
I know this is great because now I have unrestricted access. No one's like looking over my shoulder over everything. So, which I'm kind of surprised about because they kicked her out of that, but she still seems to have a decent amount of access. I don't know. Anyways, I did feel a little optimistic about Jesinia's access because obviously she's going to have more access to information and she's able to kind of freely research things now. But, and this is a point that we're not 100% clear about because it's a little foggy. We do know that some parts of the royal vault and sublevels of the archives are blocked. We're not entirely sure how much of that is, but there are parts that leadership and Markham cannot access. We just don't know exactly how much of it or what is blocked off from them. But if Jesinia, through part of this mission and whatnot, does get access to some of that, then that could be helpful. Jesinia ultimately gives Violet 6 tomes to start with, and we get some very interesting historical/Dragon Quest related things, including the following. The tomes consist of information covering the southernmost isle of Deverelli, which was the last isle Navarre had communication with.
If Deverelli is sounding familiar to you, it should. Back in Ironflame, when Violet and Xaden first visit Viscount Dakaris, the dress that Violet wears is made of Deverelli silk. And who could forget when Kat knocked on Xaden's door in a Deverelli silk robe, and Violet answered the door. So this is not the first time that we have heard about Deverelli.
And then to add some historical context, Navarre stopped communication with the Isle Kingdoms, but Poromiel had not until very recently, like the last couple years. Viscount Dakaris seems to have secured some land in Deverelli because he does try to offer peace for Violet and her loved ones in his exchange that he presents to her in Iron Flame about her playing guard dog for him for a few years around Corden. Furthermore, at bare minimum, he's continued to trade with Deverelli until recently when the Deverelli merchants deemed it too dangerous to continue trading. So, obviously, Deverelli is going to be a hot point of discussion in this set of chapters, so we will discuss it more later. Professor Grady had requested tomes related to the exploration of the Emerald Sea in the north. I have a little bit more of a formal thought about this later, but at this time, I was like, why does he want to go north? What information is he going off of?
We'll discuss this more in depth in the next chapter, but I think most likely it's because it's unexplored. And more importantly, they can set up a base on the coastline where they will still have access to magic, which is essentially what Grady says. So I feel like his reasoning, there's no deceit in that. I feel like he's being forthcoming about why he wants to do that.
Jesinia mentions she was reading General Cadeo's journal, and a whole section of pages is ripped out after he notes that there may have been an outside isle supporting the second Krovlan uprising. So this is the first time that General Cadeo has been mentioned, and based on the context, I'm assuming General Cadeo must have been a Navarian general.
I would agree, and possibly the commanding general of Vizgayath War College at the time. Little unclear, but I would imagine they really only care about the personal accounts of people that are in higher up ranks.
Yeah.
So I think
Right.
that stands to reason.
So this is the part where I got a little bit confused because I was like, oh, second Krovlan uprising. I've heard that before. I can't remember everything. Why is this concerning? Yada, yada. So to give a quick refresher on the history so that the significance of this makes sense, Navarre as a kingdom was established in 1 AU after the Great War against the Venin. At this time, the first wards were established which protected the 6 unified provinces from the Venin, but it kept out Paromial. For the next 230-ish approximate years, Navarre basically erased all history of the Venin's existence and kept how they made their wards a secret from everyone else, including the kingdom of Paromial. We can assume that because Violet states that there are no historical records in the archives, or at least anything that she would have had access to during her scribe training, that were older than 400 years old. From information we get in Chapter 5 of Fourth Wing, Navarre and Paromial have been at war for the past 400 years, which means this war would have started sometime in 233 AU, because when Fourth Wing starts, we're in 633 AU. Going into Iron Flame, we're 634. Beginning of Onyx Storm, we've entered the beginning of 635 AU. Over the course of the next 400 years, Paromial has been fighting off Venin without any protection or help, except possibly the Isle Kingdoms at one point. And one of the reasons they began attacking Navarian outposts was to get alloyed weapons, which extend the natural limits of the wards, because this imbued alloy is also the same thing that can kill Venin. Or at least that is the main reason that we have been enlightened to throughout Fourth Wing and Iron Flame.
I just want to say you deserve an award for putting that together. Okay, bless you. I was so relieved when I logged in, looked at the notes, and I was like, oh, thank God. Thank God. Because, guys, I just got to coast on all of Lorraine's hard work. So everyone give Lorraine a pat on the back. Send her a nice text or a DM.
I needed it for myself, but, hopefully that helps clarify things for everyone.
No, it is really helpful because there's so much timeline stuff happening pre-unification. Post-unification,
yes.
600 years ago, Venin, General Daramore, the brothers, the rebellion, and it's nice to have it succinctly laid out.
Yes. So with that history fresh in your mind, the fact that General Cadeo, a Navarian general, would know that an Isle kingdom may have been involved with the second Krovlan uprising is odd, because Navarre severed communication with the Isle kingdoms for siding with Paromial around 206 AU. Which was a couple hundred years before the second Krovlan uprising, which occurred sometime in the 400s. So, Violet finds it weird that a Navarian general would know that an Isle kingdom was involved with this second uprising, because how would he have found that out? Where was he getting that information from if there was no communication with the Isle kingdoms? I have many thoughts that stem from this information. First off, when was the first Krovlan uprising? There is basically no information about that. Only the second Krovlan uprising, which has also only been mentioned a couple times in passing, and we barely get any contextual information about that. So then I was wondering, is the first Krovlan uprising the inciting event that led into the 400-year-long war between Navarre and Paromial?
I was wondering about this as well. And also, it made me wonder why only Krovla? What were Signet and Breivik doing at the time? Because we know those are the other two provinces in Paromial, and they're ruled by a leader. They're ruled by, well, right now it's a queen. At the time, we don't know if it was a king or queen. And so it would stand to reason that the monarch was supporting the uprising, or the monarch would have put the uprising down. Something isn't fitting there for me, and I'm confused by that.
Yeah, the structure of Paromial as a kingdom is also a little confusing. One thing I do remember distinctly about Paromial is that their provinces maintain their identities. I remember that while they're sitting in battle brief in Iron Flame. So Signet and Breivik, the quote was like, they're more likely to label themselves as Signet or Breivik people as opposed to like Paromish people. And so I don't know if Paromial's provinces are as unified as they are for Navarre.
Yeah. The individual provinces have a lot more autonomy, even though they have a queen compared to the ones in Navarre. That makes sense.
Right,
That tracks,
right.
honestly, with a lot of the interactions and things that happen politically in this book.
I also was thinking that perhaps this indicates communication wasn't cut between everyone as they thought. Maybe General Cadeo was secretly meeting with people from the Isle Kingdoms, and Navarre lied about emissaries being killed when they visited. I don't know. I'm very confused by this. So
Honestly, it just feels like the government conspiracies and cover-ups will never end. There's just so much that they're hiding, and we just need to
add it to the list.
let it
Yep.
know. Yeah, we need to know.
So the statement also seems to imply that General Cadeo didn't become a Navarrian general until sometime after Navarre cut contact with the Isle Kingdoms. Does that track with what you figure as well?
I think so, yes. Everything we were discussing, the timeline, all of that, everything it's tracking for me.
Okay.
Maybe we're wrong. I don't know. If we're wrong, Lord, please someone let us know. Help us. Help us
Yeah.
understand.
Also, another bit of information about the Second Krovlan uprising that isn't directly connected, but I feel like is kind of important, was a detail from chapter 33 of Iron Flame, where it says, healers, infantry, or even scribes could be the general of the armies until about 200 years ago with the Second Krovlan uprising. After that, the commander of the riders commanded all Navarre's forces. And I just feel like that's kind of interesting because something about the Second Krovlan uprising was very significant from a military perspective. And since then, they're like, you have to be a rider to command the army. So
I agree. At the time when you read that in Iron Flame, you're like, okay. But now, getting more about the Krovlan uprising, it does seem to indicate militarily there was a huge impact, because we know that the riders are the most valued asset for Basgaith and really for all of Navarre's military.
Violet and Jesinia figure the only scribe who might know about this time period is Papa Sorrengail. We know from chapter 24 in Fourth Wing that part of Papa Sorrengail's research was related to the Second Krovlan uprising as well as Feathertails, something that Daddy Atos knew he was researching and then also told Varish about in Iron Flame as well. So the big question is, what is the connection between Krovla and Feathertails? I think the fact that Papa Sorrengail's research involved both of these things indicates that they are linked. We just don't know exactly why. Papa Sorrengail's letter in chapter 18 doesn't specify what quote-unquote weapon he means, but we of course know he was researching the Feathertails. We also know Andarna is the mystery 7th dragon breed who is able to kill venin. So just kind of going on a speculative limb and letting my brain wander about different things, I'm wondering if Krovla figured out that Feathertails are dragon hatchlings and wanted the dragon eggshells so that they could make their own alloy or wards somehow. Because that's kind of been a pro-mish thing as of recently, is that they've been taking the alloy because they know it kills them. So maybe they figured out something about how the alloy is actually made. The other thought was maybe they figured out about the unique magic that Feathertails can accidentally gift before they grow older and officially channel. I don't know. There's a lot of interesting questions that come into play.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that because, Andarna was a Feathertail, it feels like, for such a short period, and it seems like so long ago. But you're totally right, because that was a huge plot point in Fourth Wing, is that they didn't want anyone to tell about Andarna because they were afraid leadership would then try to take advantage of Feathertails in hopes of getting their gifts. That's really interesting. I also thought it was interesting that the focus of the research and the implications of the research affect Feathertails and not the 7th breed of dragon. We're also focused on Andarna and her being special, which I still think that she is, but what if it's really the Feathertails that are going to be the real, I don't know, key, link, whatever, as you've kind of already speculated towards?
It feels like there's two distinct things happening right now. We have one mission about finding Andarna's 7th breed, which we do know is linked to venin. We also have a Feathertail situation going on that is implied to be in connection with fighting off venin as well. But there hasn't been a direct link made between Indarna's seventh breed and Feathertail's yet. They're all kind of in this mix of things going on.
Everything is important and we need to fucking know everything.
Yes. Yeah. They're like parallel lines of thinking heading towards the same thing, but they haven't crossed yet.
That makes sense.
Anyways, to get back on track, we also know from chapter 43 of Iron Flame that when a dragon hatches, it sends out a pulse of energy that can be felt within a 4-hour flight radius from the hatching point. And with that happening, it would also transform the area back into hatching grounds. In addition, dragon eggshells are a key material to make alloy hilted daggers that can kill venin, and this alloy also boosts the wards. We don't know exactly what the ward stone is made of. I did go back through and I was like trying to find all the information about what the material the ward stone is made of. It's either referred to as a stone, or Xaden does mention that his father thought it was polished iron. Obviously, we know it contains metals, which Violet believes are mostly iron, since that's how Sawyer, as a metallurgist, was able to alter the material underneath the rune and deactivate one of them. I didn't find anything that explicitly states that the ward stone is made similarly to how the alloy for daggers is made, but if alloy that gets imbued is made of palladium, a few other ores, and dragon eggshells, then wouldn't it stand to reason that at least some of those materials are also used to create the ward stone as well? Because it also needs to go through an imbuing process?
I think it does. I mean, everything you're saying, I'm like, well, that kind of makes sense. Like, I can't think of why it doesn't make sense. So my default is, well, yeah, you're probably right. I don't know.
I was thinking real hard, okay? So
I know, but what you're saying makes sense, because you know if it was bad, I'd be like, girl, you can't say that. I would keep it real with you. So
That's true.
I'm with you.
Okay, we're still tracking. Okay, I have one more thought. Well, actually, that's not true. I have a couple more thoughts.
I was going to say, quit lie, don't lie.
Continue. To continue on this track. So from knowing all that, you can also reason that the one thing Paromial doesn't have access to create alloy or a wardstone for themselves is dragon eggshells, right? Paromial could probably find a way to mine or trade for other materials, but they don't have dragons. And it's dragon magic that blocks all other magic except theirs within the wards. So
jinx.
Maybe that's what Krovlan found out about, and now they wanted it because
for their own
protection. This could help us. Yeah. So anyway, that's where my brain was going with that. Now, my apologies. Obviously, I went very crazy with all of my thoughts. I started going off on a little bit of a tangent about the wardstone in Auracia versus Navarre, because that is also another point that I think is really important that we don't get enough information about. They are different. They were separately built, but we don't know what the implications of those differences are. So when they fired Auracia's wardstone with only 6 dragon breeds, the flyers could still use their magic. But in Navarre, when they used all 7, then it fully blocked the flyer's magic. That could also just be related to the runes that they put on the wardstone and not necessarily the dragons. But the lack of Indarna did leave flyers able to still wield in Auracia. Right? So something's going on there. I don't have a formal thought about it, but I just wanted to mention it.
The excerpt from the last episode from Lyra, where she says that Auracia should be a haven for flyers and riders, and now it is should one or the other ever return. And that implies to me that, in conjunction with the conversation we're having now, that Lyra bailed on Navarre. She went to Auracia, fucked with that wardstone so that flyers could also be protected. Potentially, at one point, as I speculated in the last episode, it was active because she said, and now it will be that haven. Something happened. Obviously, it was extinguished. So, I mean, all of that kind of tracks with the breadcrumbs we're getting so far.
Something's going on there. And yeah. Anyways, like I said, I don't have a formal link, but it's there. The pieces are all floating out in front of me. I can't pull them into a clear picture yet. So now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, we'll get back into the actual sequence of the plot in this chapter. So, unfortunately, getting that research is going to require the help of Dain, because it turns out it's still hidden in the general's quarters, which are now occupied by Daddy Atos. Boo.
How dare you? What do you mean, unfortunately, it requires the help of Dain? Leave Dain alone.
No. That wasn't a dig at Dain. I was saying that it's unfortunate
okay.
that it's in Daddy Atos's quarters that Violet no
Okay.
longer has access to because
I
it's
just
Daddy
heard you
Atos.
say, unfortunately, it requires the help of Dain. And I was like, how dare you, bitch? How dare you?
I am fully in support of Dain now.
Okay.
So, yeah. But I was like, boo Daddy Atos, basically.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Boo Daddy. I'm with you on that. Fuck Daddy Atos.
So 3 days later, the squad sits in battle brief, and as they look at the map, there are many more red dots indicating venin attacks, and they spread from the Barrens, follow the Stonewater River, and spread out along the border of the ward, as if the enemy is searching for weaknesses. Violet notes that though Peromial's Breivik province has been slammed with attacks, Signet hasn't, and their flyers still haven't been sent to Navarre yet either. A little
Sus.
bit odd. She also notes that Peromial's seat of power, Suniva, still stands, which causes her to hope that wherever Queen Mariah's summer house and library is well protected.
I mentioned this in the last episode. Getting access to Queen Mariah's library may be more risky and challenging than it's worth. In this conversation, Devera also says, as you can see, there is a defined supported assault happening along the ward centered at the Samara outpost. We believe it's simply because it's the straightest path that leads to here, the hatching grounds. This seems like a logical conclusion, but I'm going to point it out and note it here that perhaps it's for another reason. Now, what that other reason is, I don't know. I wish I did. We do know that it's indicated by Violet in her thoughts that it feels like the venin are just kind of poking around the border of Navarre to find weak points in the wards. And Samara seems to be a particularly weak point. It feels like a lot of the descriptions of Samara, the wards go down a lot there.
And also calls back to our discussion last episode. The wards have been falling, but they're for reasons that aren't explained or don't make sense, because we know like the flyers haven't continued attacking some of those outposts, and yet the wards are weakening and starting to fall. And so because it hasn't been answered for us yet, why is that? Next, Professor Devera announces that the cadets would have 3 more classes added to their schedule. The first is a venin class, which they all just received a new anthology of venin-related texts on, and this would be taught by Professor Keandra. The second class is for rune intensives, which they would be on a rotating schedule for since it's going to be in Eratia. I'm guessing this will be with Professor Trissa, who we met in Iron Flame. With the recently confirmed fact that high-level venin, believed to be Sage and Maven, can and do wield signets, the third class is going to be a hands-on approach with different professors to help the cadets learn how to combat different signets.
I think it is extremely telling that with the news of this information, even Devera's tone softens just a little. This has to be so shocking and scary for all the writers. Venin are already extremely lethal, but something that the writers have always had was that they didn't have signets. But now even that one advantage has been taken away, because you would think, I have a fucking dragon, what's going to beat that? Nope, wyverns. Okay, I have a signet, I can do this. And now, plot twist, your enemy also has signets. Probably even signets, in Theophany's case, more powerful than yours.
Extremely frightening.
Extremely. Not a good day to be a writer, guys.
So, the small positive to these classes is that the Signet class is related to the solution Xaden offers to help get him off the border and back under the protections of the wards, because Lieutenant Duke Xaden Riorson is now a professor as well. Yay!
You know, this really gives a whole new meaning to the phrase hot for teacher, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But of course, we wondered last episode about whether venin had signets when Violet encounters Theophany, and this now textually confirms that point. It also clarifies that a sage or maven ranked venin can wield a signet, which now puts us back into the square of not quite being sure whether Theophany is a sage or a maven. This is also very terrifying because we know venin already get heightened senses, like hearing or sight, in addition to their speed and strength, but they now also get specific magic manifestations as well. And I was like, motherfuckers.
Yeah, ain't sounding so bad to be a venin, I gotta say. And they're basically immortal. I don't know, maybe sign me
Except
up.
for your soul.
Yeah,
which
but
I
you
guess
live forever.
You don't care about.
You don't need it. Just kidding, guys. But I mean, seriously, what advantages do we have? We have fucking dragons and magic, and we still can't hang with the venin. We're fucked. This is the point in the series, for those of you that listen to our Throne of Glass coverage, where things keep happening, and I'm like, okay, but like, the odds are stacked too high and they're insurmountable, and there's no way we can overcome this. And at this point, this is how it's starting to feel. There's too much bad. The baddie bads are too good, and we got nothing. And I'm not feeling good.
If this is all because of that third brother that got jealous, then, I mean, he really went all out, gathering all the power.
That's always the third brother. It's always the jealous younger sibling.
Okay, while we are all thrilled that Zaddy is back on campus, Violet instantly thinks of Article 8, Section 1 of the Code of Conduct, which prevents professors and cadets from being in a relationship. Womp
No!
womp. And that now ends Chapter 13, moving on to Chapter 14, starting with the excerpt. This one is from a personal memoir of Lyran Panchek titled Tactics Part 2. And the excerpt discusses how, though flyers wield lesser magic, they are still formidable opponents due to their mind work and hand-to-hand combat. I did feel like this foreshadows the strategy we see from Second Squad during Signet Sparring when Cat messes with Garrick's emotions to confuse him. This also makes me wonder what other mind-related abilities that flyers have, because we have really only learned about Cat's abilities so far.
Yeah, I think we have a few more notes about that later in their actual Signet Sparring with Garrick. But no, that's a really good point. I also wonder if it's foreshadowing of some of the combat scenes we'll get later in the book with flyer cadets.
Ooh, yeah. I also thought it was interesting that Panchek is a lieutenant at the time this excerpt was written, and he is now currently a colonel and the commandant of the Riders Quadrant. We also learned he was stationed in the Northern Wing at this time. So having learned the details of their new academic schedule and their pairings for the Signet Sparring class is dismissed and the cadets file out. Violet quickly hints to Ree over the issue with Xaden being a professor now before she branches off to find Dain and enlists his help to recover Papa Sorrengail's research. She ends up finding Dain in front of Professor Kaori's doorway where she asks for his help because the commanding general's quarters are warded, so only their line by blood or marriage can pass through, and now that bloodline is no longer Violet's. Rest in peace to the Sorrengail parents. But Violet is mostly concerned that if Atos finds it, he'll either keep it for himself or Atos or Markham will redact that information.
And we know she's worried about this because way back in Fourth Wing in Chapter 24, he asks Violet about her father's research and if she knows where it is. And of course, Violet lied. And so we know that Daddy Atos and then Varish and Iron Flame are both interested in the research. And they're bad people. So if they're interested in it, it's not for a good reason. And we don't want them to have it.
Yes. Before Dain gets a chance to answer, Professor Zaddy enters Kaori's office. Mom and Dad fight again over whether they are still in a relationship because of the rules. And I thought it was funny that Bodhi was like, wait, you guys broke up? And then at the same time, Violet's like, yes. And then Zayden's like, no.
I love how Bodhi just nopes the fuck out of there. He's like, well, I have class, so good luck handling this. Bye.
This is too messy. I'm going to leave now.
I know. Bodhi does not like drama. If there's any kind of drama and tension, he's out.
Yeah, but also, when are we going to get more from Bodhi in this series?
Like,
he's literally barely ever there. He makes one comment in scenes and then he's gone. And I'm like, what's up with him? Nobody knows. Dain excuses himself, leaving Xaden and Violet to speak privately about Xaden's latest title edition. I was a bit concerned when after Violet asks why Garrick didn't come back to Biscayeth, Xaden says, considering he was dangerously close to my side when I lost control, we decided the babysitting program wasn't as effective as we'd hoped. I only bring this up because we know it's getting harder and harder for Xaden to maintain control, and if anyone is nearby when he accidentally channels, they would get drained too. I guess now that he's back within the wards, it'll help, but still, it's becoming an increasing concern.
When I read this note, I was like, oh my God, what if he accidentally drains someone like Garrick or Bodhi? I've been so worried about him just channeling in general and becoming more venin. I forgot that, like, him channeling from the earth, if anyone's close, he can just suck them dry, right?
Yep.
So I was like, oh my God, that's really bad.
Once again, Xaden is, of course, still a book boyfriend for excellent reasons, though. And this is another example of why, when he tells Violet, I live by you, when have I ever given a fuck about the codex or the code of conduct? And I was like, yes,
Oh my
just the
God.
best.
I live by you. That line almost took me out. How can he say only 4 words and somehow it's like the most romantic shit ever? Whew.
On rules. It's you and me, baby. That's what he wants. So the conversation moves to a brief discussion of what happened outside the borders, and Xaden clarifies that he didn't remember reaching for the source or taking power during the battle. It was simply there. If Sorrengail hadn't, she spoke to me for the first time. Yelled is a more accurate term, and I snapped out of it, but the damage was done. So while Xaden wasn't intentionally trying to take more power, it seems like it just becomes easier and easier for it to accidentally happen. And like, thank God for Sorrengail, but the fact that this is when she finally talked to him again also implies that he was in danger of maybe taking a lot more. Like, you don't really know how much he was about to drain.
It also seems like based on his phrasing, drawing unintentionally outside of the words is easier, but once you start, you can't stop. Like if Sorrengail hadn't snapped him out of it, he just would have kept going, almost like he was in a trance, and it was only Sorrengail literally screaming into his mind to stop that made him stop, which is really fucking alarming.
Sure
really
is.
Alarming.
Yup. Atos is the worst possible cockblocker. But alas, he is again busting into the room and immediately preemptively denies a request for an exemption to the code of conduct. He also threatens to ensure he wouldn't hesitate to kick Xaden off campus if they break said code of conduct. I love that Xaden still calls him an asshole and it's like, it's not against the codex to insult you.
Not just the insult, it's that he added, I checked at the end. Like, he went into that pre-planning to insult him, and that's what got me.
Violet then clarifies that she killed Barish as she leaves the room. Joe's like, boom, mic drop. Outside in the hall, Dain walks Violet to class, and since we are in the camp that Dain has been redeemed now, I like that he tells Violet the blame isn't solely yours, and then agrees to help get Papa Sorrengail's research next weekend while Atos is away in Kaldir. I find it just a little bit odd that Atos is going to Kaldir. As far as we know, there is no threat to Kaldir right now because they're on the western border by the ocean and very far away from venin attacks. It also didn't seem like the Duke of Kaldir really likes Atos because he dismisses Atos with that "you have no purview here" comment when Atos brings Violet to the meeting in chapter 8. So what is he going there for?
So let me preface this by saying this is such an unimportant thing, but I am so fucking proud of myself for remembering this little nugget. King Tari lives in the province of Kaldir. Back in Iron Flame, during Battle Brief, Devera mentions that info from the front actually comes to Besgaiath before it's sent to the king in Kaldir. There are also a few other references to this. Violet is thinking about Arik hiding his identity from Markham, and she thinks, at least until his father sounds the alarm that he's missing from his gold-plated bed in Kaldir. That's also right. Where Lilith was when Varish was torching her in Iron Flame, and there are several other references of leadership like Markham goes to Kaldir. So I'm assuming he's going to Kaldir for the king.
Okay, this makes a lot more sense now. No conspiracy.
I can't believe I remembered that, because when I first read that, I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, wait a minute, I swear that the king lives in Kaldir. Because there's also some historical discussions in Iron Flame about why they put Besgaiath where they did instead of in Kaldir, blah, blah, blah. So obviously he could have a totally other purpose. But for me, based on the world building, it's probably because that's where the king is.
That makes sense. So yes, I'm going to agree with that and as the explanation. So aside from that, though, I don't see how people can still hate Dain. He has done so much to help, and this adds to that. I know their friendship is still not how it used to be, before Fourth Wing, but I hope that it'll get restored again because they grew up together and they were so close before the events of Fourth Wing and everything. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Not only do I not hate Dain, I like Dain. I actually like him. So far, everything that's happened in Onyx Storm has made me like him even more. I'm not ashamed to say it. And you know what? There's a part later in the set of chapters where I got a little heated because they were doing Dain dirty again. And I got real mad. And everyone needs to leave Dain alone.
Oh.
You'll know when we get there. It's when they're at the pub.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And I have some notes about that.
So the next Monday, 4 days later, Violet sits in a quest squad meeting that is driving her absolutely crazy with the incompetence of it all. Just to give a brief timeline update at this point, it's been at least 3 to 4 weeks since where Iron Flame left off. Jesinia was kicked out of the Adept Path on January 15th, and we know that the major venin attack that happened at the end of Iron Flame happened on winter solstice, which is December 21st. So that's how I came up with a 3 to 4 week timeline right now. I love that the map that they are using to represent the Isle Kingdom is described as a hand-drawn, shapeless blob. And Jesinia sitting in the meeting, just like rolling her eyes the whole time while she takes record of everything. Because honestly, this is just the most unserious situation for a very serious mission. What are you guys doing with a freaking hand-drawn map? But I will say that the fact that they have a hand-drawn map of the Isle Kingdoms literally means that they have no fucking clue where they are, because there is no record of it, apparently, which of course is suspicious because we know Navarre cut contact with the Isle Kingdoms, so...
It seems like Navarre's strategy is if we don't like you, it didn't happen and you don't exist.
You're
just
cut,
gonna cut. I don't know why, but I just pictured this big, beautiful, extremely detailed map with like toddler level blobs drawn in crayon for the Isle Kingdoms. Like they're the ones like,
Yep.
You know?
Pretty much. As the meeting is happening, Greedy reiterates his belief that northward is obviously the answer, which is exactly the opposite of where the Isle Kingdom's Violet wants to go to in the south and east of the continent. So I'll admit, I'm a little bit confused about the geography of the Isle Kingdoms specifically, but based on Chapter 38 in Iron Flame, we know that the Isle Kingdoms consist of 5 large and 13 smaller islands that surround the entire continent in every direction. I guess some of these isles are in the northwestern area, and then we have a separate set like down below, and there's just differences on where they think they should be going. But
while Violet is waiting for Xaden, she thinks about how it has basically been impossible for her and Xaden to sneak around and see each other because of all the Navarrian riders basically stalking them so they can snitch Daddy Atos.
Yep.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the prologue of this book, Xaden manages to get all the way across campus and past 2 riders who were guarding the entrance to Jack Barlow's cell by basically blending into the shadows, almost like he was invisible and definitely undetectable. I remember in the prologue, Violet even thinks the only way she knows which way Xaden is going is by the temporary flicker of mage lights as Shadow Xaden passes them. So why can't Xaden just melt into the shadows all the way to Violet's room? And then they can just close and lock the door. It's already sound shielded. So I don't understand why it's so hard for them to sneak around and be together.
That's a great point. You're fucking
Thank you.
right.
I know it's
Also,
a really dumb thing, but it really bothered me.
No, you're so right. Because I was like, I think you guys have a couple workarounds for this situation.
Right?
A, the shadows, as you just pointed out. B, if you really wanted to, couldn't you ask Garrick? Well, I guess you don't know if Garrick can pull people with him, but maybe he could.
True. You know what? This is probably a terrible place to put this. I think I was so excited in the last episode about everything that was revealed. I forgot to ask a bunch of really important questions about Garrick's Signet, like how far can he go? How much energy does it take? Obviously, he can do it with his dragon, but can he take other people? I have a lot of questions about Garrick's Signet that I feel like we did not appropriately address last episode, so that was our bad. We were just really fucking excited. But I do want to know more about Garrick's Signet, so we'll just drop that in here.
Right. Well, it seems pretty clear that we don't know the full extent of everybody's signets. We barely know anything. Like, we're just scraping the first levels of what people can do with their signets. So
That's so true. I mean, even Mira, who's been graduated from the Quadrant for a few years, was able to expand the ability of her signet in Iron Flame by creating a shield, a ward around Brennan and Violet when they're at Dakaris' house. So obviously, the older you get, the more practice you get, the less likely that is. But even people who are graduated can still expand the, parameters of their signet, I'll say.
Yes. And I think this is something that gets mentioned in either chapter 15 or 16. They're talking about how, what did they say, like a lieutenant or something can wipe the floor with I forget the ranks, but they talk about, the difference in ranks and how as you rank up and you get more experience that you're going to be stronger with your signet and everything. So.
Yeah. Well, also I wondered, sorry not to go down a big rabbit hole, but as your dragon ages and grows larger, I would assume that their power grows, decade over decade, and therefore what you can pull from them would grow too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Anyways, to get back to this incompetent Quest Squad meeting. Professor Xaden has impeccable timing, and he strides into the meeting with the line, "I forgive you for failing to invite me," with the reasoning that Taryn and Sigale can't be separated. And Grady ultimately agrees to allow Xaden into the Quest Squad, although he does so very reluctantly. At this point, the Quest Squad, who were all picked by Grady because Grady trusts them, all introduce themselves. So we have Captain Henson, who is an air wielder, Lieutenant Pugh, who has farsight, Lieutenant Foley, an agrarian, Cadet Aura Binehaven, a fire wielder, and
Boo.
Captain Anna Winshire, an infantry liaison, and who we also learn is involved with Halden.
Yeah, she is.
Xaden challenges why they didn't have any shield signets in the group, and more specifically, why not Mira, since she is proven beyond the wards.
One thing I wanted to quickly note is that we've been bouncing around the idea of a new powerful 6, quote unquote, being reestablished, and we've speculated that maybe Mira could be considered powerful enough and her signet rare enough because previously we were unaware of any other riders that wielded shield signets. While Mira's may be extra powerful, this does confirm that there are other shield signets, so I think that takes her out of the running for the new 6. I have to be honest.
Ooh, yeah. Okay, that's a good point.
So she's off my list.
Oh, no.
I know. Sorry, Mira.
Anyways, this is definitely going to be a problem considering Xaden's a venin, and he already struggles with keeping control outside of the wards where magic is more wild. So they're going to need to get somebody as a shield wielder in their ranks. While Xaden's flex of power throughout this conversation does turn Violet on, it pisses Grady off, and he makes it clear why aristocrats don't wear black. Xaden is clearly annoyed, but Violet notes a flash of something cold in his eyes, which is very alarming because it seems to indicate a slip in his control.
This is not the first time this happens in this set of chapters, and nor will it be the last as we continue throughout this book. I don't have a coherent thought that I can really verbalize on what this means, but I know it has something to do with his soul slowly eroding from channeling from the earth. I feel pretty confident in that assessment.
Grady reiterates that his final decision is that their first mission will be along the northward coastline. His reasoning is that basing the operation at the coastline gives us access to magic, plus the Emerald Sea is largely unexplored. I get the magic thing, sort of, but I am still trying to figure out why else Grady wants to go to the north when Violet believes they should go south. I feel like Grady also has other information that he hasn't shared yet. I mean, maybe it really is, and I'm just overthinking all of this. But I was also wondering if maybe he's following information from like Warwick's journal or something, because Warwick is from Lucerys, which is the northernmost province in Navarre, and it's also bordered by the Emerald Sea. Did he get some information from his dragon? I don't know.
I have to be honest, I think for the most part, there's not really a conspiracy here. I really think Grady's being a pretty straight shooter here. I think that they definitely want to have access to magic. That would be a huge detriment to all of them and make them extremely vulnerable if they didn't. I also think, as he states here, that they are supposed to go back and make reports on their progress so they won't have to fly as long in between. I think there's a little bit an element of, I don't think Grady's hostile to Violet, but I think probably a lot of the leadership are tired of Violet running around like she's in charge and everybody just needs to do what she says. So there's like, I'm a fucking professor. You've completed half of your second year. So like, take a step back. I also think the Emerald Sea may not necessarily be the worst place. It is largely unexplored. Not much is known about the area. And so Violet's reasoning for wanting to go to Deverelli is mostly gut instinct. It's not like she has a ton to go off of either, at least not until she has her father's research, which no one else has access to. So, I mean, Grady's logic is not bad. We just, of course, are like Team Violet because we also know about the research. We know more than Grady does as readers. So, I don't know.
Violet does counter that the last known Isle kingdom Navarre had communication with was Deverelli, and that for the right price, they could buy information. Everyone starts arguing while Violet fills in on her speculations based on General Cadeo's journal and her father's research. Grady insists that south is not an option and too high of a price, and then he adjourns the meeting. Xaden and Violet attempt to get a moment together after 4 miserable days apart, but Aura Binehaven cockblocks moment under direction from Atos that the code of conduct is to be followed to the letter.
Boo.
Boo. And that ends chapter 14, moving on to chapter 15. Starting with the excerpt. This was written by Major Garrick Savoy in a text titled Griffins of Pearl Meal, A Study in Combat. We learn that any rider can be brought down by a lack of a shield or a group effort. It also mentions some combat signets being fearsome. We know that the flyers are skilled in mind work and thus the importance of riders maintaining mental shields. This also foreshadows the technique Second Squad uses to throw Garrick off in chapter 17. 4 days later, Second Squad gets their first Signet Sparring class with Zaddy in the outdoor amphitheater of the infantry quadrant. Just as an overall thought, I loved getting to see the riders and flyers use their powers in a more active way. We really only see combat use from a few of our characters, mostly Violet and Xaden, so it's cool to see the range of capabilities that different signets have and how they face off directly against each other.
I totally agree. In fantasy books, I really enjoy complex systems of magic, and one of my favorite parts of Rebecca Yarros' systems of magic are the signets. They're just so cool, and she has a really incredibly creative mind to think up all of these different signets, and not only that, but the nuances of those signets. For example, even though we don't know a ton about intrinsics, we know from that poor guy in Fourth Wing that he could hear people's thoughts in real time while Xaden reads intentions. Things like that make them so interesting and so diverse. Even as we've talked about already in this episode, we're already seeing even known characters' signets develop more. And so I really love that. I think that makes it really exciting and interesting.
The squad immediately feels the weather ward at the arena, but we also learn that it's been warded to ensure whatever they shield will stay between the opponents on the mat, and that their signets will not leave the amphitheater or endanger the campus. Violet and Xaden mentally check in, and Violet states that she still hadn't come across anything useful in relation to Deverelli, the Venin, or Andarna's breed. The tomes of the Dark Wielders both Queen Mariah and Takaris have sent. There's been no hint of a cure or mention of a dragon ever torching a Venin, like Andarna did. That was one of her thoughts to him.
See, this is what I'm saying, though. I just don't think books with this kind of information exist, and if they do, not Navarre or Poromil, because Navarre probably would know about that and or would have kept them somewhere if it was to defeat Venin for their own personal protection. And poor Emil has been trying to find a way to get rid of the Venin for centuries. I feel like they're going to have to go outside of the continent.
Well, good thing that's where they're going.
I was going to say, well, good news for us. Deverelli, here we come.
As everyone gathers to sit in the surrounding stands, Violet notes that like many of Fourth Wing Squad, the First Years and First Wing Squad are seated as well, and she thinks dragons are taking their time when it comes to channeling. We know that dragons have not been willing to bond as much over the last couple of years, but it seems like the bonded ones are also being more cautious with when they fully start channeling to their riders.
I noted that too. We know from Fourth Wing that it seems like dragons decide when to start channeling magic to their riders, because there's that scene when Andarna is like, she's ready.
She's ready. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Violet starts channeling very soon after that. And then, of course, manifesting a signet, they're on their own for that. They got to do that on their own. But I wonder what would make them not want to channel to their riders. If anything, they should be more incentivized to channel sooner so they can manifest a signet so they can better protect themselves. Because every rider that dies, risks the dragon's life. The older you are and the more riders you've had, the deeper the bond. But you would think they'd be like, day one, time to channel, motherfucker. You need to get stronger in practice because Venin are coming. Yeah.
Right. That's a good point. It seems like the dragons trust the humans less right now. And I am assuming it just has to do with the increase in Venin and everything. And they're being much more cautious about who and when to actually give out their powers. So once settled, Lauren, a cocky third year in First Wing, challenges Xaden's qualification to teach as a recent graduate. But he gets his ass handed to him, which I thought was really funny. Xaden doesn't even have to look at Lauren because of shadows can feel where he is. Plus, Xaden can read his intentions for what he plans to do. He also goes on to then take down basically everyone else with zero struggle. We knew that Xaden is powerful, but it just becomes more and more clear that he is quite literally the most terrifying opponent you could have, other than Violet.
I will say it is a little unfair because no one knows that he can read their intentions, and that gives him like a wildly unfair advantage.
Right.
I mean, don't get me wrong. He's super powerful and talented in the shadows and all that. But
Yeah.
I did love when Lauren is circling behind Xaden. And not only does he not even turn, instead he looks at Violet and fucking winks.
Yep.
Like, that's how little he gives a shit about what's happening. And then, not only that, he lifts a single finger, like one fucking finger. That's almost more insulting, and just
Right.
fucking destroys Lauren. But the cherry on top for me of this whole scene is when Riddick goes, I'm either completely in love with your boyfriend or utterly terrified of him. Not sure at the moment. I was kind of like, yep, that's about how I think everyone's feeling right now. I know I cannot shut up about this scene, but something I never really thought about was how Violet and Xaden never label themselves as anything but together. Violet says to Riddick, he's not my boyfriend, and using their mind connection, Xaden says, agreed. That's far too casual a term for what we are, which, first of all, swoon. But second, I'm not going to go so far as to say this series will have a fated mate situation, but it really does seem like Violet and Xaden are destined to be together more than that they're just extremely in love. There's forces at large that are pushing them together.
Yes.
Something else that is also super cool about this scene is another really cool piece of magic is introduced and has been expanded into what we know about wards and what they can do. We're familiar with sound shields and warding bedrooms so people can't enter, but this amphitheater and the wards they used to create it are so freaking cool. The way I see it in my mind is like a snow globe, like the power, everything's contained in the snow globe. Now, granted, it's a very deadly snow globe. You do not want to go in there, but it's still really cool.
Yeah, that's kind of how I picture it too. I'm really curious to see the full range of things different signets can do, because the whole point of this class is to expose the weaknesses in your signet so that when you come up against a dark wielder with the same power, you will have already practiced how to defeat them.
Something the scene made me think about are the riders who don't have combat signets like Imogen and Dain. While their signets are totally badass and crazy helpful in a lot of situations, they really aren't going to help them in a fight against venin. Honestly, they're kind of at a disadvantage even compared to the flyers because, as we've seen in the past and in this set of chapters, mind work can be really helpful in battle. I think about, for example, Kaori. If you don't remember his signet, he's an illusionist. His signet is, of course, amazing, right? He can conjure images from things he's seen.
Right.
But what the fuck is he going to do against a signet-wielding venin? And so it really draws into question a lot of the people that have cognitive signets, like Melgren. His signet's really fucking great and helpful, but in an actual combat battle, it's not going to help him.
Right. Well, I wonder if that's part of the ingenuity of what Second Squad is introducing, this concept of working people's signets together.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why they start training it together, is because, on your own, you probably would be kind of fucked. Maybe not entirely. Well, okay, let me backtrack. I'm not going to say you'd actually be fucked, because when you think about it, confusing somebody mentally is extremely disorienting. And so that's really dangerous, because if somebody is so confused about what they're looking for, or like what's actually going on in their reality, they can't really do anything well, because what they're seeing is not true, I guess. So,
but that speaks to more like the flyer's mind work. Wiping a venin's memory isn't going to change much, nor is like Dain being able to see their memories. Also, they have to get their hands on them to do that, which means if they're getting close to put their hands on them, they're fucking dead. You know what I'm saying? But
fair. Yeah.
I guess as we're kind of talking about it, this concept of working in a squad, it's not like Violet and her squad are pioneering this idea. Back in Fourth Wing, when they go to Montserrat, Mira makes them go through this whole exercise, this hypothetical situation where they have to use each other's signets to figure out how they would plan an attack. I think, honestly, this concept has been introduced, but how it goes down is foreshadowing for future conflict that's going to come, and also speaks to a theme of the book. Are Violet and Xaden very powerful independently? Absolutely. But there's strength when they work together with others, when they all come together against a common enemy. In a way, is that not the essence of the book? Everyone has to come together to fight the venin.
Yes, I think so too. I would also imagine that when they do that training exercise with Mira, they're getting experience with something that prior to you exiting the college, you don't get a lot of training in it.
Yeah.
I mean, as they said, they weren't really focused on people's signets. They were focused on
No.
hand-to-hand combat and, keeping your skill set hidden from somebody else so that you could surprise them. But now we're
Yeah.
seeing the transition to like, no, you guys need to use your signets. You need to know what other people can do because, as you said, when you work together, it's a much more effective, much more lethal strategy.
Xaden even points out, like, not only did they do that, they were encouraged to train in secret so they could have any edge they could in battle. And so it is a revolutionary idea for them to not only work with others, but like, here's what I can do and here are my weaknesses. How can I compensate for my weaknesses with you and vice versa? So look at Violet and Xaden just inciting change.
I also found it interesting that when Auric challenges if he's going to teach them how to defeat him, Xaden responds, "There's only one person capable of taking me down one day, and it isn't you, Grey Castle."
Worst last name ever.
Yeah.
Every time I hear it, I'm like, womp womp.
But yikes. That does not make me feel very good. I really hope that this is not foreshadowing that Violet will be the one to take Xaden down in the end. If he continues, like, succumbing to veninness. Either that or, Theophany is going to come back into play against Xaden since she has lightning, too.
I hate everything you're saying right now.
I do, too, but I feel compelled to say it. I'm worried about it. So, other riders and flyers challenge, and of course, Riddick hilariously gets caged by a set of icicles of their own making. I did get a little curious about a potential romance between Kat and Traeger later when he tells her, "It seems like a waste of time to chase someone who doesn't want you when there are plenty of people who do."
Oh, poor Traeger. He is down so bad for Kat.
I know.
See if anything blossoms between them, but for some reason, I'm not feeling it. Kat needs somebody. I can't come up with a good match for her. Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe we'll learn more about Traeger and maybe it'll end up working out. But poor Traeger, I think he's going to shoot his shot and have to move on.
Last but not least, Xaden challenges Violet. And that ends our chapter. Moving on to chapter 16. Xaden immediately envelops the mat area in darkness to level the playing field, but he instructs her to use their pathway to track him down so Violet feels their bond, which feels like a barely perceptible tug. I also thought it was interesting that Xaden clarifies, "I can wield from anything that casts a shadow, but no one knows the strongest threads are always my own. If you can sort through them, feel their difference, you'll be able to track where I am in the darkness." We already know that Violet and Xaden can feel each other with their bond, but this seems like the next stage of refinement in terms of being able to specifically distinguish the threads of power coming from Xaden versus what's being pulled from other sources of shadows. Like, it's more specific,
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, I've reread this section about a dozen times, and this entire interaction just felt extremely ominous to me. And it also felt like foreshadowing for something else entirely. I feel like this is one of those, like, a conversation is happening and you're thinking, okay. And then when we get to the end of the book, we'll be like, oh,
the Onyx Storm.
The Onyx. Yes. Okay. Literally, that's what I wrote. To me, this is not about Signet Sparring at all. Specifically when he says, "You'll be able to track me where I am in the darkness." There's so many different directions you could go with this, literally and metaphorically speaking. But let me just point out, as we all both just agreed, this book is quite fucking literally called Onyx Storm. Onyx is a dark color, devoid of any light. And hello, it gets dark as fuck in a storm, okay? I think this conversation is foreshadowing that Violet will have to find Xaden in the quote-unquote proverbial dark and save him.
Yeah.
As she's already kind of doing now. So this scene, I think it was meant to be kind of romantic, but honestly, it left me feeling not very good.
I totally agree. I had similar thoughts about the the implications of Onyx Storm and shadows and all that. This situation does not make me feel better about Xaden's fate because Violet asks, "Why me?" And he says, "You're the only one capable of killing me." So is she going to need to track him down because he becomes more venin? And then in general, she's the only one that can kind of distinguish him. Because think about it, his signet is shadows. He can envelop everybody in shadows. So if he becomes more venin and now he becomes the weapon, and he envelops a whole battlefield in shadows, the only person that's going to be able to find him is probably Violet. So the class then ends after that, and the next day, Second Squad is out for a much-needed day of relaxation together in the Six Talons pub in Shantara. Everyone discusses how they hadn't realized the true extent of Xaden's power, though Violet always had. Once again, I love that Sawyer is there with them, and overall just the dynamic of Second Squad. They're the best.
It's described here that Violet takes a sip of her lavender lemonade, and let me just say, if I was Violet, I would never drink lavender lemonade ever again. Not after what happened with Nolan. Absolutely fucking not. Absolutely not. Honestly, if I was Violet, I'd be so paranoid. I would only drink what I sourced myself. Like, I would carry my own drinks around with me. I ain't trusting nobody.
Point, yeah.
Okay?
Why
Never
is she
again.
not more paranoid?
Well, not only that, but leadership still has access to the serum that blocks them off from their dragons. And keep in mind, Violet is not popular with leadership. So,
true.
After that Vera shit, could never.
Swearing off lavender lemonade forever.
Yep.
So the squad is waiting for the riders, and eventually Cat, Marin, and Traeger do arrive back from Temple and join in on the conversation as well. In relation to Xaden's increasing power, Violet states our signets can grow. We spend our lives honing them and figuring out our limits. A third year is way more powerful than a first, just like a colonel can wipe the floor magically with a lieutenant. We've already kind of talked about this topic, but I do really wonder what else everyone will be able to do as they gain experience with their signets.
Me too, especially because when you think about it, they are only halfway through their second year of school, and they've had a lot of interruptions to their education. And so really, they haven't got the time and attention they need to develop them. So I'm really excited to see even just where they end up at the end of their second year or even into the third year. Obviously, since we haven't read the book, we don't know the timeline of where it ends, but I am really excited to see how it goes.
Rhiannon brings up her worry for Lynx and Auric, however, since they haven't manifested a signet yet. We learned that in addition to Sloane being a siphon, Avalyn wields fire and Baylor manifested Farsight. I am really curious about the other signets, especially Auric's, since he's also of royal lineage. I feel like one of them is going to get a super powerful signet because Violet was a late bloomer and she is a lightning wielder. I don't think it's coincidence that this example of somebody developing a signet kind of late is, brought up in this context and everything too.
Absolutely. And I gotta be honest, I don't care about Lynx's signet because honestly, I don't even remember him from Iron Flame.
True. Yeah.
I think he's mentioned like 3 times, but Auric's I am dying to know. Especially in a lot of ways, I feel that he's similar to Liam's character. He's basically the top in his year like Liam was. It's hard to describe because I know we don't know as much about Liam, but Auric seems very honorable and good. Yeah. I don't know. There's just seems like a parallel between them. So I am really curious to see what Auric's is. I just feel like Auric's is going to be important. And I think maybe part of that is because Auric is in line to the throne, right?
Yes,
and so
absolutely.
That already increases his significance to the story overall. So I don't know, but I want to know.
Damn. This is the next big signet reveal that we are looking for, I guess, is...
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you're right. Well, Violet's second signet.
Well, Violet's second, yeah.
I was like, whoa, bro, you forgot one really fucking important. Violet's second signet.
So Riddick also makes a dark joke about Lynx and Eric exploding being a better alternative to them manifesting as an intrinsic because we know what this guy does to them. But that had me side-eyeing. Obviously, we've been on strong signet watch because of our theory about a new group of 6 signets developing with 6 powerful riders. So will somebody else become an intrinsic as well?
And if so, will they try to hide it?
True. Yeah.
Because if someone in their squad, Auric, Lynx, it doesn't really matter, manifested as an intrinsic, they would try to cover that up. They would try to keep them from being executed.
Obviously, yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
So that would be an interesting plot twist. I don't know why this stuck out to me, but even on a first read, something about this interaction just seemed a little off to me. Rhea asks Marin how Temple was, and Marin says, our offerings were received. That, plus earlier in the chapter when it's noted that the Flyers had been visiting the temple for hours, makes me suspicious that the Flyers are up to something. And saying our offerings were received actually has some kind of double meaning. I don't think that they're up to anything bad or like they're going to betray Violet and the squad, but it's giving the vibes of back and forth wing when the marked ones were delivering weapons to the flyers, right? Like, oh, our offerings
Right.
were received. Wink, wink. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just felt a little strange. Maybe it's nothing, but
Yeah, spidey senses are tingling. Not sure why, but they're tingling. Next, we do get some interesting information about the gods when Traeger mentions that the temples to Malik and Dune are disproportionately large compared to the other gods, except Amari.
before we get into this conversation, I have two overarching thoughts for this whole part of the chapter. The first is that Lorraine and I have both concluded and mentioned that we feel that the gods are starting to play a seemingly larger role in this series. This conversation points in that direction. The second thing is I want to do a quick rundown of gods because I feel like there are so many that are talked about now. It's getting a little tricky to keep them all straight. And so I just needed to do like a little refresh for myself. So I figured I'm probably not the only one. The gods are as follows. Dune, the goddess of war. Malik, the god of death. Zihnal, the god of luck. Amari, the queen of the gods. Hadian, the god of wisdom. And I'm going to say this wrong. I know I am. Loyal. Okay,
Loyal,
the
I
goddess of love. Yeah. So Dune, Malik, and Zihnal are mentioned like most often, and then Amari. And then as we discuss, Hadian and Loyal have just been recently introduced. So those are all the gods that have been mentioned or in play at this time.
Do you think it's interesting that there's 6 of them?
Holy shit. I didn't even notice that.
I mean, 6 people on the scenarium, and
6
then
provinces.
6 writers, 6
The
provinces.
dragons. Huh. I do think that's interesting.
I don't know why it's interesting, but I don't think it's coincidence that there's 6 of them. Just saying. Oh, okay. Anyways. So Sawyer states that with their proximity to Bisgayeth, war and death are top of mind, and that checks out. Violet also states that they never really prayed to Hadian for wisdom because knowledge and wisdom are 2 different things. Scribes are careful not to ask for what should be earned, and then also adds that Lilith was never temple-minded, while Violet preferred Amari's temple than Malik's after her father died. Symbolically, Violet's comment about knowledge and wisdom being different makes sense and strongly applies to her situation. Violet is in the process of uncovering the truth and pursuing knowledge, but how she applies that knowledge and discerns what's true or useful will require wisdom. And wisdom is something that is developed over time with experience. Riddick then also adds that he prefers Zihnal, which also checks out because he just gives off a go-lucky attitude.
Honestly, I thought the same thing. That totally tracks for Riddick's character.
Overall, I do want to know what the dealio is with the gods. Is it really purely for culture and lore of the world, or are they going to come into play directly somehow? I'm starting to feel like they are. I just don't know how.
I know. I go back and forth this all the time because it doesn't seem like they're going to come into play as like physical characters, but they just get mentioned so often. I don't know. It's starting to bug me. I'll say that.
I could totally see a situation where there's like some blessing or some curse that came from a god or something that gifted somebody with something or whatever. And then that's why somebody is super strong, or I don't know.
I can get down with that. Yeah.
Next, Dain approaches and speaks to Violet privately about the side quest to retrieve Papa Sorrengail's research.
I need to interrupt our analysis to say this once again, not to you, Lorraine, but to the squad. Leave Dain alone. I did not like it at all when Riddick says he prefers Zihnal because you can get through any situation with luck. And then Rhys says, and ours must have run out because here comes the wing leader. And I was like, why? That was so unnecessary. Dain has more than redeemed himself. And I'm just really annoyed by that. Okay, Dain has done more than enough. He's sorry. He was a freaking 21-year-old kid who trusted his father. I'm sorry. I get heated about this. I'm mad. And I did not like that. And they need to fucking be nice to Dain. Especially after he successfully delivered the research in the set of chapters. No one better give Dain shit anymore.
I totally agree with that.
Thank you.
He has ultimately agreed to help Violet. Yay, Dain. But this is a big moment for their friendship, I think, because Violet has to trust Dain to retrieve the research since he can't bring her into the room without them getting caught. We know Dain reading her memories in Fourth Wing had been a pretty big breach of trust, among other things, but I hope this will be the last thing that gets Violet to fully trust him again.
Not to mention, nobody else knows this, but Violet knows this. Xaden can read Dain's intentions. And so if Dain had any
True.
intention of betraying, now granted, shields and all that, but I just feel like that added extra level of protection should tell Violet all she needs to know.
Yes. At this point, Dain helped kill Varish and break her out. He joined the Eurasian riot and became a traitor in the eyes of his father, who basically has disowned him at this point. He helps Violet with the research and interpreting Warwick's journal for the wards, which he could have given over to Bisgayeth leadership at any moment as soon as they came back, but he never did. And now he's helping to retrieve Papa Sorrengail's research. So what else does he need to prove that he can be trusted at this point?
That's what I'm saying, okay? That's what I'm saying. Thank you, Lorraine.
So that ends chapter 16, moving on to chapter 17. The excerpt for this chapter, Papa Sorrengail has a first name, and it's Asher. This excerpt was recovered correspondence from Papa Sorrengail to Violet. I thought it was interesting that he refers to Violet as his brightest light. Violet is known for her scribe mind, but her signet is also quite literally the brightest light. To me, this excerpt also confirms that Papa Sorrengail and Lilith knew for quite a while that Navarre was hiding the truth because it said, "Your mother and I trust no one." But I also don't quite understand why he didn't want Brennan and Mira becoming writers, but Lilith did. I'm wondering if Papa Sorrengail just didn't want his kids dying for the wrong cause accidentally.
I wonder if it was sort of a situation where they didn't really have a choice. Brennan and Mira both grew up with their mother as a writer who literally became the general of the war college, and it would only be natural for them to want to follow in her footsteps. And it wasn't really like they could be like, "Hey, all of our young children, come here, let us tell you this really crazy government conspiracy theory that's happening,"
Right.
you know? As this series has progressed, it has become apparent to me that Lilith and Asher were working within the system to dismantle it from the inside. It seems like they knew a lot. And I mean, and Asher says that in his letter to Violet, trust only Mira if your mother's gone. And if Lilith is gone, then you're the only one who can hold this. I also think that maybe they just hoped that as powerful writers, when the time came, Brennan and Mira would be able to use their powers to make change. So I think it's possibly a combination of a variety of those factors.
In addition, this does connect back to the knowledge and wisdom comment Violet made in the previous chapter because he was working on exposing Violet to the history that Navarre teaches and how it differs from the truth. It's going to be up to Violet to piece together the rest of the discrepancies between what they have been told and what the truth really is. The next morning, the squad stands outside while the death roll is read. Every death hits especially hard knowing that they can't afford to lose more riders, but after formation breaks, Sloan pulls Violet aside to hand her the super important research. I thought it was touching that Sloan and Violet do get some time to talk as they walk to the Quadrant Library. First of all, Sloan is on archives duty, which is a sweet reminder of Liam, because he worked archives duty with Violet as well. Sloan confesses that she let Lilith's death happen because she wanted the wards up, but she swears it wasn't out of revenge and that she was sorry she hadn't stopped her. Violet assures her that she was glad that she didn't because if I had succeeded, Xaden, Tairn, Sigale, and I would all be dead. The world needs Brennan. Arik is irreplaceable, and I wouldn't trade you for any wordstone, Sloan.
Aww.
This is a big shift because Sloan was so angry at Violet at the beginning of Iron Flame because she blamed her for Liam's death. But over time, as she's gotten to know her and from Liam's letters, she's coming to see Violet a lot differently.
I agree. This was really a big growth moment for Violet and Sloan. I really hope we continue to see their relationship develop as the series progresses. Also, in general, I want to see more of Sloan and specifically more of her signet and how it works. I don't have a ton of evidence to support this, but my gut tells me having a siphon is going to be really important at some point. I think maybe this is kind of derived from the whole Naelin Brennan thing because we know Naelin was a siphon, but I feel that siphoning is going to be real important at some point.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, conceptually speaking, as a siphon, you're drawing and taking in power from somebody else.
You're like a
and
venin,
yet,
basically. I mean,
I think it's just the fact that you have the dragon connection
to ground you.
yet to play the middleman, that you don't become that. But yeah, it's very similar. So I hope we learn more about them. Sloan hands her a black canvas bag with 2 tomes picked by Jesinia and a third one from Dain. They briefly discuss the Quest Squad mission and how they were scheduled to head north, and even Sloan comments on how it seems odd because Thort hates the cold. So first off, this gives us her Dire Tail's name. I can't remember if it had been told to us before this point, but just as a reminder, his name is Thort. And second, Violet notes that it makes sense for Thort to hate the cold because red dragons' ancestral hatching grounds were along the limestone cliffs at the edge of the Dunas River. This is also the point where I wondered if maybe there were traces of ancestral hatching grounds of one of the dens near the border with Krovla. And maybe that's how they find out. Like, playing into our earlier discussion, maybe that's how Krovla found out about these things, and that's why it's connected to Feathertails. I don't know. My brain was just whirling around. I don't have anywhere to grasp on too solidly, but I was just putting things out there as I thought about them. Back in Violet's room, she realizes her father's research book has a 6-letter lock and 6 vials of ink ready to disperse and destroy the research if you got the combination wrong. There's also a rune in the center that looks suspiciously like the one that makes things end badly if magic tampers with a lock.
And we know that most of the runes end with them blowing up in your face, so. After seeing the rune, Violet thinks to herself that she definitely needs to spend more time studying runes, and that's what I'm freaking saying. I know they're doing rune intensives, but given that the ward stones are covered in runes, and what Violet knows about the runestone that gave the marked ones their relics and literally extra signets, it seems like runes are really fucking powerful. And I believe that there is an excerpt to that effect that runes level the playing field. And so
yes.
It would seem to me that, I don't know, maybe they should all spend more time researching and learning about runes. An intensive in class is not enough, that they should be focusing on that as well. Because I don't know this at this time, obviously, but runes are, you take magic from a source and you embed it into an object. If they go somewhere out of the continent when there's no magic, are runes still able to be used because the power's embedded in the object? If that's the case, then they're going to want to be using runes all the fucking time whenever they go to Devreli or whenever they're searching for Indarna's Den when they don't have access to magic.
Oh, right. That's a good question about runes, because the process of imbuing things, they can store that power in them for later and use it later. But I guess the question does become, does that still function in a place that doesn't have magic anymore?
Exactly.
I guess is the one question that you would have about that. But if it does, then I totally agree.
Hugely
that
important.
Seems like it would be a really great advantage to have that with you.
Yeah. Well, and none of them know enough about runes. Even Xaden, I don't think, knows that much about them. And it's like, maybe we should all work on that ASAP.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a whole conversation I feel like we could have about runes and what they do. The venin know about runes because they put rune stones in the wyvern. And so...
Oh, that's right.
I'm like...
goddamn.
Yeah. Anyway, your brain gets going. We don't have enough time to talk about all of this. So we're going to move on for now. But bookmark that shit, everybody. Okay? So the book is also complete with a scroll on which Papa Sorrengail wrote, "First love is irreplaceable." I will admit my brain immediately beeline to Violet's liaisons. But as we see, that's not the answer. So
my first thought was actually Lilith. I know that comes up in quite literally the next sentence, but in the half of a second I had to process, that's what I thought.
So a few days later, the squad heads to the infantry pit for another Signet Sparring class, and they take guesses of what the 6-letter code could be. This entire conversation was so funny to me because everyone is basically just snooping into every Sorrengail's past love interests.
I love when Riddick says Brennan's name and then begins counting the letters on his fingers, because that's exactly what I was doing. I was like, Lil, BRE, because like, I cannot look at a word that has 6 or more letters and be sure how many letters it is without checking on my fingers. If it's 5 or less, I can do it. But like 6 is the threshold where I'm like, wait, I can't do it.
Yeah. This inevitably leads to a discussion of Violet's first love and us dying when Arik turns around and asks, how many letters? And then he says, I mean, it fits. And I was like, OMG, why? Holden! But I did think it was funny that he's going so far as to imply that he was Violet's first love, which we see really bothers Professor Xaden later on.
Really bothers him. And it really bothered Addison how much it really bothered Xaden. So
class begins, and to everyone's surprise, Garrick is here today to help as well. Once again, Riddick wins with his comments when he says, ooh, Imogen is gonna love having class today.
leave it to Riddick to point it out, and I love that. I love him for that. Honestly, I feel like I'm a little like Riddick because I think a lot of thoughts that should probably be inside thoughts, and I just blurt them out, and so I feel for him. But also, he's hilarious, so you can't really be mad at him.
Xaden introduces Garrick while simultaneously having a mental sexting conversation with Violet, which causes him to choke mid-sentence.
I was simultaneously laughing and crying when Riddick shouted, oh, guys, just stop flirting and fuck already. And I was like, ooh, I was like, that was a little awkward. But then he doubles down. Violet says, Garrick's going to blow you off the mat. And then Riddick responds, now that I might enjoy depending on the method he chooses. And when I tell you, like, I was screaming when I read that. That was so freaking funny. Like,
he says like wild shit, but he's also not embarrassed. He's like gonna double down on everything too, which is even funnier. So yeah. The sparring begins, and Garrick proves to be pretty formidable, and Rhys suggests the brilliant idea of challenging him as a team. I loved this plan. It immediately made me think of the quote from the Book of Brennan that says, at some point, probably during your second year, you'll realize the trust you feel for your friends and family has nothing on the loyalty you develop for your squad. And I just love that in this book, they just do everything together, and now they're training like their combat skills together. Second squad takes their place on the mat, and of course, I'm going to note the flirtatious banter between Garrick and Imogen because I'm rooting for Imogen. She says, you don't want anything to do with these. And she lifts her hands. And then Garrick's like, why don't you put them on me and we'll see. Woo! The squad begins their attack with Rhys summoning Garrick's daggers while Riddick throws up an ice wall that gets blown into ice chips by a tornado-esque gust of wind. One thing we have been watching for are increasing signs of Xaden's veninous, and this instance was one of them yet again. The ice almost hits Violet, and she notes Xaden looks at Garrick in a way I've never seen, like his best friend has suddenly morphed into prey, and there's that cold edge in his eyes that prickles the hair at the back of my neck. It's all ha-ha, he when Xaden says, you're mine to Violet before he was venin and all that, but now that he is, it feels like when he has these momentary lapses in control, he becomes a lot more possessive than protective. So
in an unhealthy way.
Yeah. Kat and Quinn combine forces to confuse Garrick, and then Violet summons a precise strike of her lightning to the dagger Garrick had just blown away and says, if I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. Hooray! All of the training that she's been doing with Taryn every day has paid off. Our girl can aim.
Thank God. Thank God. Speaking of that, though, something I really love from this scene is that Violet is successful because of her hard work. I feel like often in fantasy books, the FMC will discover she has this great power and she's completely untrained and can't do shit with it. And then in a big battle, when it really fucking counts, they have this big moment where they realize the power was inside of them all along. And they can do this crazy, unbelievable thing with their power. And I like that Rebecca Yarros has made it clear that Violet is having to work her ass off to get better and more precise with her lightning. Even in battle scenes where people's lives literally depend on it, she still misses. And I like that because I think it's realistic. I hate when a character is super powerful and they have to do basically no work. They just have all this power and they're just like, pew, and you're like, wow.
They just are. Yeah.
Yeah, they just are. And I'm like, that's such bullshit. That's so annoying to me. So I like that Rebecca is really making Violet work for that.
Yeah, and that's been a thing for her since even before she bonded Taryn and developed her signet. She had to work literally from the very beginning. So much harder. So
Violet's a hard-ass worker. I'll give her that.
As a side note, even though the Flyers have integrated with the Rider squads and the second squad has been together for a couple months at this point, why is it that we only know what Cat's power is? We know nothing about Marin, Traeger, or any of the others right now, and I want to know why that is.
That is an excellent point. All they ever say is that the Flyers specialize in mind work, but they never actually explain what all that entails. I would assume there are many different kinds of mind work, just like there are signets. And I would really like to know because, I just would really like to know.
Yeah, I think it's important that they know too, because if they're not aware of what the Flyers can do, you have the shields, I guess, to counter them. But on somebody
Still.
who's more vulnerable, who's not very
Yeah.
experienced with their shields, if you don't know what you're looking for, you can't be on guard for it. So
No, true. And also, they can't help each other and use each other's signets to their advantage.
right. Kind of going into our discussion in the last chapter about the Flyers being our offering to have been received and it being just a little suspicious. Who's to say they haven't been using their signets on people under the radar
true.
because nobody knew about it.
That's true.
Because it's all in the mind.
Yeah. Huh.
Just food for thought. Anyways, training exercise done. It's time for some drama when claps from the steps announce Violet's former liaison has finally made his appearance. Violet quickly tells Xaden to hide Auric, while Prince Halden descends the steps in a perfectly tailored dark blue infantry uniform. Second squad files off the mat and Violet takes a seat next to Halden. The tea keeps spilling when Violet thinks he's just as strikingly beautiful as the last time I saw him, but his eyes are the real showstopper. They're as green as summer leaves, but man, do they wander.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
We know what that's leading up to.
Ooh, yeah, for sure. But okay, every time one of the Taris is discussed, it's always about their damn eyes. And I know that's just, they always mention, even with Auric, his eyes are the distinct thing that she's like, they're going to know you because of your eyes. Halden also has these striking eyes. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on with eyes? I'm not about to present an eye color theory here.
I was going to say, whoa, girl.
TOG. But I just find it kind of weird that this is a really distinct thing with them. Maybe it doesn't mean anything, but
I hate to burst your bubble, but we were comically wrong about our eye color theory in TOG.
I know we were, and that's why I'm like, it probably is nothing. But
for those of you that have listened to TOG, you know what we're talking about. And those of you who have not, you need something to do in between weeks of episodes. So just start TOG and start listening so you can catch up, so you can be in on all the jokes and also laugh at us.
Okay, anyways, Violet gets straight to business while Halden attempts to flirt, but the piping hot tea is finally served when Violet says, "You'd have to own a heart to break it, and the only hair I remember is your professor's covering your face when I walked in on her riding you."
Ooh.
Ooh, I know. Quite literally, all I heard in the back of my brain are those sitcom audios of someone going, "Oh," in the background, because I was like, oh shit.
Ooh, I got secondhand embarrassment from that, man.
Halden doesn't seem to give a fuck, though. He seems
doesn't.
unfazed. So
You're just yeah, it was a long time ago, my bad.
Halden eventually hands over a missive from Viscount Takaris, which states a few things. Also, he's read that missive, by the way. He just snooped right along and opened it up. So here's what the missive says. First, Viscount Takaris had her requested tomes ready, plus some hand-picked ones from his personal library. Second, King Courtland of Deverelli has agreed to a meeting with someone of noble blood in exchange for a gem called Amelian Citrine. Third, Queen Mariah has agreed to gift the gem, but someone else has to retrieve it from its display in Anka. Fourth, she needs to let Takaris know when she has the gem so he can schedule the visit. And by this point, I was like, all right, we're going to Deverelli for sure, for sure.
I freaking hope so, because we need some damn answers.
Halden goes on to say that Amelian Citrine is a lesser magic amplifier worn by one of the members of the First Drift, and that if she were to get it, he would persuade Grady to change course. Also, Anka is in Paromial beyond the wards, and it's part of occupied territory. Violet thinks that she wasn't sure if it's still occupied or one of the cities that they drained and moved on from, referring to the venin. So in Chapter 2 of Fourth Wing, we learned that the kingdom of Peromule mainly consists of arable plains and marshlands and is known for exceptional textiles, endless fields of grain, and unique crystalline gems capable of amplifying minor magics. So Amelian citrine is one of those gems for sure, and we know flyers have minor magic. So, I mean, clearly, if one of the first flyers had one of these gems, then they're probably using them for other flyers too, right?
I would think so, yeah.
This also leads to the question of why does a king in Deverelli in the Isle Kingdom want a magic amplifying gem? What is he going to do with it?
Especially when there's no magic there. And not only that, it's not just a regular old gem. It's historically significant. It was worn by one of the first flyers. So that makes it even more rare, special, etc. So really, why does he want that? Unless it's
Exactly.
just to collect, to say he has it, which, I mean, is possible.
Seems suspicious to me.
Agreed.
So this is kind of worrisome. We know Violet needs to be able to get to Deverelli, but I'm also concerned, I don't know, Halden is so willing to just let her go into Peromule and work with Dakaris because as a Prince of Navarre, I sort of assumed he'd just have some tension against working with Peromule, even if recent events are easing some of that tension. There's still been a long-standing history of warring. So something just felt a little bit weird to me, but I don't know. Halden shifts the conversation to prodding about Violet and Xaden's relationship, which Violet makes very clear is one of love. Halden does make a comment that becomes the key to Papa Sorrengail's lock when he says anyone who's ever dated a rider knows their first priority, their first love, is their dragon.
Oh my God. Immediately when he said that, the alarm bell sounded. But honestly, I thought the password was going to be dragon, not the name of Lilith's dragon. So I was close, just not close enough because dragon is also a 6-letter word. So I was like, oh, dragon, duh. So but it ended up being Lilith's dragon's name. So, close but no cigar.
Close, yeah. In the same realm.
Yeah.
Halden then asks to have a dinner with her to apologize properly. But when he tries to reach for her hair, Zaddy,
oh my God,
Toucher and Dain Riorson blasts him straight into a rock wall behind him.
Toucher and Dain Riorson.
That's what he was.
I know. I have a question to ask you. That was too funny. Now I can't focus. Okay, so here's my question for you. Based on this very limited interaction with Halden, just first impression, is Halden being genuine about being sorry for what he did to Violet? And are we going to grow to like him by the end of the book?
I don't know that he's being genuine. I don't really trust Halden right now for whatever reason. I think
we just met him.
Well, I mean, in what little information we know about him, he cheated on Violet and was like not very remorseful about that when she brings it up. He's like, oops, like, sorry. And now he's like, I want to have dinner so I can apologize to you. And I was like, the switch seemed too sudden to me. And him opening up that letter to read it, even though it wasn't addressed to him, something's weird about Halden to me. I don't like him. So I'm going to say no.
I think I have this problem that I just like assholes and I just want to believe that they can change and give them the benefit of the doubt. Because my gut just says that we're going to like Halden by the end of the book. I think he's going to show a lot of growth. I think he's going to end up being good ultimately. I mean, he's still going to be haughty and arrogant and annoying. And don't get me wrong, totally not excusing his behavior or what he did to Violet. But I don't know. I feel like it's just like very subtle ways it's described, like his voice softened and he's like, no, seriously, I am actually sorry. I mean, don't get me wrong. He's still hitting on Violet. But I don't know. I think I might like Halden as the story progresses, not in this moment.
Anyways, that ends chapter 17. Moving on to chapter 18. The excerpt. This was from a memoir titled The Last Admiral by Admiral Levian Crosslight. It discusses how he couldn't imagine sustainable life beyond the Emerald Sea because no ship has ever survived the tempests that form its ice-tipped waves. The only sailors who return do so defeated. We really know nothing about the Emerald Sea and beyond, which borders the entire western side of the continent, but this excerpt indicates that it's freezing cold on that side. I also got really excited because there is no ice wielder on the quest squad so far, but it seems like they will definitely need one if Grady wants to take the squad northward into the Isles that way, which means, will Riddick get to be on the quest squad? He just has to be able to go, because I do not want to read an entire portion of this book where it's just like Violet, Xaden, and the squad that Grady put together. No, thank you.
No, thank you.
That's not exciting.
No. If you think I'm going to read more than like 10 pages of Aura fucking Bindhaven, you can get fucked. That's not going to happen. Absolutely not. I am really starting to wonder about the Emerald Sea. I wonder if it's a bit of a red herring situation, meaning it's just introduced to create intrigue and pull us away from the Isle Kingdoms, or if it will actually become important at some point. Maybe not in this book, but in another book.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good point. So Violet and Halden's guard, Captain Anna Windshire, a redhead, rushes to help Halden. Xaden excuses the blast of shadow as his attempt to block a potentially lethal blow to the first year. Just like, all right, Xaden. Once again, Violet notes the glacial rage in his eyes, which seems pretty similar to the flash of coldness she'd seen in his eyes earlier as well. While this was somewhat concerning in terms of the shift in Xaden, I did still think it was funny that when he comes up and says, she really honestly hasn't thought about you, at least not since the second she set eyes on me. I was like, oh, he's always been extremely confident, if nothing else, so...
Ooh, I just need to take a deep breath because I wrote a TED Talk for this.
All right,
you can tell where all of my energy in this episode went right here. So for this scene and really the rest of the chapter, I honestly cannot believe I'm going to say this, and I alluded to this earlier in the overarching thoughts, but Xaden gave me the ick so bad. And you guys know I love him. I love him. I really thought he could do no wrong. Before you come for me with pitchforks, let me give you my reasoning. I am all for toucher and die energy, but not when it's derived from a jealous, borderline controlling place. To me, it reads as really immature, and even Violet thinks that. She's like, that's real fucking mature. If Xaden didn't knock Dain on his ass, who actually Violet had a long time crush on and actually kissed her at Threshing, why would he do it now to Halden, who literally just showed up? It's sort of like in the movies when the guy and the girl are at the bar together, and another patron of the bar hits on the girl, and the boyfriend just starts swinging. And the girlfriend gets mad at the boyfriend after the fight's over, and he's like, but I was protecting you. And they never get the point. They weren't protecting them. They were being macho, pig-headed, embarrassing idiots. And that's kind of the vibes that I'm getting here from this scene.
Yeah.
Then when he talks to Halden, he says, second, I don't control Violet, never have, never will. But his own actions reek of control. Violet is a strong, independent woman and easily could have taken Halden if she wanted to. He didn't even give Violet a chance to knock Halden's hand away or tell him to fuck off. He just charged in like a raging bull, taking away Violet's control of the situation. He didn't trust her to make her own decision how to respond and react to that. And that was a big turnoff for me. Ooh. Finally, the whole interaction just really reeks of insecurity. What I love about Xaden and Violet's relationship is how confident they are in their steadfast love and devotion to one another. Basically, all of Iron Flame was about Violet being insecure and Xaden reassuring her. And now Xaden is throwing a fucking temper tantrum because her ex showed up and started talking to her. And then I wrote, yuck, no thanks.
Typically, I definitely agree. I don't like the whole like super controlling, jealous kind of thing. And I feel like that is different from a toucher and die energy.
It is different. Yes,
distinct and different.
Absolutely.
And I think the reason that I'm giving Xaden a pass on this right now is because it's a reflection of his venonness and not how Xaden was prior to that. And that's
not confirmed. That's speculative at best.
Okay.
Maybe the blasting of the shadows, but what he says afterwards. See, I don't know. Either way, whatever the cause is, I didn't like it. It gave me the ick. Okay.
That's a fair point, I think, in this situation. Especially the point about not allowing Violet to handle the situation for herself, I guess.
Yes, I hate
before
that.
stepping in. I would totally understand if he stepped in if it required it, but to jump in preemptively is...
Yeah. Well, And it's such a defining characteristic of the relationship. Through all of Fourth Wing, that was the biggest difference between Dain and Xaden. Dain would step in and protect and defend, and I know what's best for you. And Xaden let Violet make her own choices. And this is him taking that choice away from her. And I think that's why I didn't like it.
Okay. Fair
You're
enough.
like,
I mean,
you're like, okay. I
still,
put way more thought into it than Lorraine did.
I still just feel like I think Xaden may have had some of these underlying feelings, but he controlled them previously. But
Yes,
now
and
that
that's
he's
fine.
venin, yeah, exactly, that's fine. But now that he has turned venin and he's having a harder time controlling, you're seeing it now play out. Like,
Yeah.
he's actually acting on it. But again, would he be doing that if he wasn't venin? I guess is like my thing that I'm thinking about. See, I'm being optimistic. As much as I'm like Xaden being venin, worried about him becoming more venin or what Violet may have to do to him in the future, I'm still like holding out optimism in the sense that this is not who Xaden is at his core. So we'll see though. So an hour later, Rhee is shocked that Violet and Halden used to date while Violet turns the lock letters of her dad's research book to say, "Aim, sir." I love that Rhee says, "A prince? A duke? Clearly you have a type," because that's so real. She really does.
She really does. And it's so funny because anytime it comes up about ruling or being a part of anything like that, Violet's like, ew, absolutely not. I have no interest in that. But I'm like, damn girl, then quit dating royalty.
I know.
Because you're 2 for 3, so...
Right. Violet briefly contemplates how Xaden's complete and utter lack of control over his temper because he's venin is what explains how he threw Halden into a wall with the shadows, but she turns her attention back to the lock, feeling confident that Aimser was the answer.
But meanwhile, she continues to insist that Xaden is totally fine and still himself, but gives him a free pass on his bad behavior because he can't help it. Dislike.
I also thought it was cool that Rhee is partly also there because Violet hopes that if her guess is wrong, Rhee would be able to retrieve the liquid and hopefully retrieve some of the research, which is kind of a cool use of her power. And then now we get the moment of truth. Drum roll. Will the code work? It does. And we send a collective prayer to both Zihnal and Hadian for their luck and wisdom at this time.
Thanks, Zihnal. Thanks, Hadian.
All right, guys. So the title of Papa Sorrengail's research is A History of the Second Krovlan Uprising. The book starts with a letter to Violet, which we will be picking apart. So let's start with the details, and then we'll provide our thoughts on it next. So first, Papa Sorrengail had hoped he'd be able to read his research with Violet, but given that it's not the case and Lilith has also joined him with Malik, he warns her to protect this knowledge with her life. Second, he definitely implies that his careful study of the Second Krovlan Uprising contains basically a code of information meant specifically for Violet to uncover because he says, "I wrote this study so it could be read by others but understood by you." Third, he very clearly states that there is a connection between the pursuit of Feathertails and the uprising. The information he shares will be both alarming and enlightening. Fourth, if time has run out, then the weapon you seek to defeat those you've only learned about through lore will require her to book passage from Corden to Deverelli, where A, if Dain has not followed in the path of Daddy Atos, he can help her with Krovlish. B, she will be safe beyond the reach of magic. And C, she needs to seek someone named Narelle Anselm and give her the rarest item she possesses to be given what she needs. Fifth, if she is traveling under Navarre, then she needs to watch out for Deverelli's king because he bears grudges and speaks only in profit. All right, here are our thoughts. It's very clear both Papa Sorrengail and Lilith were aware that they cannot trust anyone, and this seems to go beyond even leadership, if you ask me. And this is not the first time that this sentiment has been expressed either.
Something I like about this is it shows Lilith's true intentions in all of her actions. I know a lot of people did not and still do not like Lilith because of how she treated Violet and really all of her children and all the actions that she took. But I think as the series progresses, we're going to discover so much more that shows us everything Lilith did was to protect her children and really was probably for the greater good in the capacity that she was able to, while still being a part of the system and dismantling it from within. I think ultimately she did the best that she could with the information she had. And I think that the sentiment is expressed by what we read in this letter from Papa Sorrengail. Lilith and Asher knew a lot and really only trusted each other and kind of were isolated with that knowledge.
Also, just as like a side question, because this is, I think, still outstanding, what drove them to start looking into all of this too is going to be an important thing to remember,
Like what?
because we still have the unanswered situation with Lilith and her mysterious sickness when she was pregnant with Violet and all of that.
Yeah, at what point did they realize something wasn't right?
Right. Next, something about Deverelli and Norel Ansem will provide her with information about the weapon that can defeat those she's learned about through lore. I'm interpreting this to mean that there's something that can defeat the venin, but whether that means a cure for being venin or something that will just completely annihilate them once and for all is kind of unclear right now. I'm guessing based on him talking about Feathertails in the sentence above the weapon line indicates Feathertails could be this weapon, but I don't know if we can definitively say that yet, though I feel very strongly that Feathertails are going to be a part of it. Now, I find it really odd that she needs to go through Corden because that's where Viscount Takaris lives, and we know that Takaris has had an ongoing trade relationship with Deverelli up until a couple years ago, but that doesn't mean he has a bad relationship with Deverelli. So then I'm wondering if it's pure coincidence, a trap, or some divine blessing that Takaris writes a letter to Violet about facilitating a meeting with the king of Deverelli and already knows what gift to offer him at the same time that Violet then reads this letter and is told from her father that she needs to go to Deverelli. We know Takaris is aware of Indarna's breed because of everything with the wards and negotiations between the Cenarium and Peromial for the Flyers, and I'm sure that Kat gives him plenty of information. But how did he know specifically about where the quest squad was thinking of going? The timing of his help seems way too perfect. And I'm honestly getting kind of suspicious of Takaris for some reason. I have like yellow flags up about him right now.
You're very conspiratorial this episode.
I really am. There's something going on with Pearlmeal as well, as we've kind of alluded to earlier in this episode. I just don't know what it is, but I'm on alert about it. I'm also pretty sure Takaris knows about Feathertails because of the history of the Krovlan uprisings, and why else would he offer to help Violet to get to Deverelli? Also, I think it's definitely important that Papa Sorrengail tells Violet to beware of Deverelli's king, but Takaris seems to have a good enough relationship with him to be able to schedule a meeting with him.
You know, I want to be like, Lorraine, not everyone can be a baddie bad, but as Asher tells Violet, literally trust no one except for Mira. So, You know what? I'm not even going to be like, I don't know, Lorraine, that's a little much. Like, not everyone. No, I'm going to shut my damn mouth because I know sure as hell I'll be wrong about that. But you make a lot of excellent points. And it does seem a little suspicious, like the timing of all that. Like, how convenient. So I think your thought is very well supported.
It just stands to be seen.
Yellow flag. I feel like we actually need flags to raise in the episode.
Oh, yeah. Green flags, yellow flags, red flags. Yellow right now. Violet's brain goes overdrive considering all of this, just like ours have, and she wonders how Papa Sorrengail would have known a merchant in Deverelli and if he knew about Indarna's kind. She relays the info to Taryn and Indarna, and Taryn's response also caught my attention. When Taryn thinks there is no magic beyond the continent, it is why we dragons remain, why it is so surprising the Irids left our shores. Excellent point, Taryn. Why would a magical creature leave a magical continent? Unless leaving was the only way to stay safe for the Irids specifically. Maybe they thought that without magic, it couldn't be used against them, so it was better to not have it somewhere where they are safe rather than have it somewhere where they are not safe. I don't know, maybe whatever was on the continent at the time when the Irids left forced them to leave. That seems to be the main thing. But anyways, once again, lots of questions.
This has prompted a question for me. Does the continent have magic because of the dragons, or are the dragons on the continent because there's magic?
I can't quite remember. I don't know if they've ever said exactly like what caused what.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a good question.
Okay.
I know that when dragons hatch somewhere, they transform the area, right? Like
Yeah, like they did that in
they
Erasure.
yeah, there's like a surge of magic that comes from that. So
I'm just
I don't know.
thinking wherever the Irids, if they still are out there, wherever they settled, if they brought some magic with them. It may not extend very
Right.
far,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
Possible.
Also,
Yeah.
does this mean that Violet didn't know magic only existed on the continent? I would think that would be common knowledge that basically everyone would know that. But like the way this conversation unfolds makes me wonder. It also makes me want to know the bigger question is, why is there only magic on the continent?
I don't know. Excellent question.
Damn it, Lorraine. I was hoping you would. Shit.
I don't have an answer to this. This is one of those things we're going to have to like bookmark and keep tabs on, I think. So I also thought it was interesting that in response to what Taryn tells Violet, and Darna chimes in to say, I know what to bring with us. And I was like, huh? What do you mean? What do you want to bring?
That was a perfect sound effect. Huh? What? Yeah, I thought about this so hard and I just could not figure it out. I feel like Indarna is the rarest thing Violet has access to. So I don't know if she can just get away with showing Indarna. I mean, obviously she's not going to give Indarna away, but I got nothing. I had nothing on that. I hope
Indarna plans on coming with them, right?
I think so, yeah. Well, yeah, because Indarna, she's not going to be left behind while they look for her family.
Right. So, like, what are they going to do with her when she gets there? Are they going to let her be seen, or are they just going to tell her to go hide somewhere, go camouflage in the boulders?
I just don't know what else Violet would have that would be rare. And it better not be some shit that's never been introduced to us in the story, because that will kind of annoy me. Violet better not fucking pull, like, the heart of the ocean from the Titanic out of her pocket and be like, this is what I had. This is the rarest thing. It better not be something stupid like that.
Yeah. Ultimately, Violet, Taryn, I keep typing train.
I know. You did that earlier. Guys, if you ever hear me laughing while Lorene's saying something serious, it's because in our notes, she's written train instead of Taryn, and it takes all of my self-control not to laugh because it's just so funny.
It didn't correct me either, so I didn't notice.
Violet, Train, and Indarna. Oh my God.
Okay, anyway, this little group agrees that even if the squad gets split in two, they will head for Deverelli. The thought is interrupted by a very jealous Xaden, who is very concerned about whether Violet loved Halden when he shows up at the door. Violet pulls him into a room and says, I was with Halden 4 years ago, to which Xaden says, yeah, I picked up on that. I picked up on a lot of things he was thinking. And Violet blinks and says, that's not how you're Signet. And then it gets cut off. This has to be an expansion of Xaden's second Signet at this point. As we've talked about, I don't think we've reached the limit of what his intrinsic capabilities are. We've already pointed out their whole situation from chapter 3, when they had that memory sharing thing going on and we were debating about what was going on. I mean, if that was an intrinsic thing, then also this situation seems to be another expansion or example of something he can do.
Oh, it has to be. It has to. But is it because he's getting better at honing his Signet, or does it have to do with accessing more powers because he's venin? That's what I want to know. Like, does being venin unlock extra capabilities for him?
I don't know. Violet is astounded that he's actually jealous, to which Xaden says, I might have turned, but I'm still a man of my word when it comes to you, referring to how he promised he'd kick any one of Violet's past liaisons' asses back in the throne room scene of Iron Flame.
Which, if you need an excuse to reread the throne room scene in Iron Flame for purely academic purposes, this is your reason. I, unfortunately, for the research for this episode, did have to go back to just read that reference conversation. And of course, it doesn't make sense without context. So you have to read the whole scene.
How unfortunate.
How
that
unfortunate.
You had to do this research.
It was. Yes, it was very difficult.
Violet explains that at the time she was infatuated and enamored, that rush of beguilement was what I knew of love. So yes, I loved him. And I thought this was really relatable. Honestly, when I was younger, I thought I loved people I had crushes on, but you grow wiser, you get more experience, and then it totally, reframes your past relationships. Plus, you can love other people at the time and then later on realize that they weren't right for you. I think what Violet said about feeling this infatuation for Halden was really spot on.
Oh, absolutely. This is so relatable. I think we've all been there, or if you are currently in your late teens, early 20s, prepare yourself. I was recently watching the movie Definitely Maybe with my husband, and there's this scene with all these young people working on a campaign. They're talking about like what their types are. And the one girl is like, my type is any guy who might be interested in me. And I was like, girl, that is so late teens, early 20s. You kind of like anyone and you convince yourself you're in love. And then you have that breakup where you're like, I thought I knew what love was, but I don't. And I don't love you.
Yeah.
You know?
Ultimately, she holds his hand to her heart and tells him this will only ever be yours. You could leave me or even meet Malik, and it still would be. I've made my peace with knowing there's no getting over you.
I like how you're reading this with like a sweet intonation. And I was reading this scene and I was just like, blah. I didn't like any of it. It really was hard for me. And honestly, this particular quote I thought was extremely ominous. I am starting to really think that Xaden dies in the story and Violet brings him back. I don't obviously have a magical foundation to explain how that would work, but there are too many mentions of stuff like this. Add to it that Xaden constantly through Iron Flame, and maybe even Fourth Wing, I have to go back and check, but definitely through Iron Flame tells Violet she'll be the death of him and she's the only one that can kill him. And man, the math is mathing on this and it ain't looking good for Xaden. I mean, she's literally saying you could leave me or even meet Malik. Like, you could literally die. They talk about Xaden dying a lot.
They really do. You're right. I don't have anything to say to that because, yeah. We do get another partly spicy scene in the form of some shadow play and intense kissing. But like the last couple of scenes, Zaddy cuts himself off and Violet tells him about her father's letter to distract him.
First, let me just say, we were joking about this in the last episode on why Xaden's shadows haven't become involved in spicy time. And here we are. The shadows have now entered the spicy chat. Yay. I'm not mad about it. I'd like to see a little more of that, to be totally honest.
Same.
Second, this kiss scene is so well written. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Rebecca Yarros knows how to write a kiss scene. It is somehow you're like, whoo, even though there's no sex, it's still good. But unfortunately for me, my third point is that I couldn't freaking enjoy it because I did not like the context. I felt like there was this weird attempt to dominate Violet and claim her, but like not in a hot way because it was out of this crazed jealousy over her previous affection for Halden. And that really just colored the whole scene for me. And this also added to why Xaden just gave me the ick in this chapter.
Yeah.
You want to know something really funny? I was talking to my sister about this, and my sister has commented in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. She's like, I mean, the sex stuff is fine, but like sometimes I just don't care. I want to get to the plot. And I'm like, girl, what's wrong with you? And so I called her and I told her, you know how you always say that? That's how I felt. And she's like, oh, that's funny because I like really liked it. I like the crazy jealousy thing. And my sister, she has a history of like kind of toxic choices in relationships in her past. And I was like, girl, that tracks for you so hard. I'm like, you should not like this, just to be clear. And she's like, well, it worked for me.
I almost wonder, because remember, he always has wanted this, like, getting Violet's love has been a thing for him since Fourth Wing through Iron Flame. He's like, you love me. Like,
yes, to say the words. I need those three little words.
I need the words. Yeah, exactly. But you know what? I bet all of that probably stems from his
mommy issues. Yep, mommy issues. Totally.
The thought of Violet loving somebody else, I'm not saying this is right, but maybe in this context, it triggers his insecurity about and not being loved.
No, you're probably right.
That's what gives me sympathy for him and why.
Oh, I'll get over it. I'm literally already almost over. As soon as we finish recording, I'll forget this ever happened.
Right. But to continue on, Violet clarifies that in order to search the Isles under the pretense of looking for Andarna's kind, they need to meet with the King of Deverelli, which requires Halden's help as well as retrieving an artifact from occupied territory, aka in the Emelian citrine. Xaden agrees to the plan and they decide they'll need to leave as soon as possible. I'm assuming we're going to get clarification on what Papa Sorrengail is specifically referring to in his research, but so far we have two kind of different things going on. We have the search for Indarna's kind, and we have Papa Sorrengail's Feathertail research. Well, and I guess three, because now we also have the Krovlan uprising situation and how that loops into all of this too. It's not explicitly stated yet that Feathertails and Indarna's kind are totally interconnected, but it's definitely feeling like they are.
I have two final thoughts about this chapter. Xaden did redeem himself a little on how quickly he caved, knowing this is all Violet has left of her father. And it was really heartbreaking when he said, "If my dad left me a letter, ... and he trails off. We know the last words he and his father exchanged were not positive ones, and I would love for Xaden to get some closure on that at some point in the series if that's going to be at all possible. Xaden also says it will at least give them a chance to evaluate how they function in the squad Grady put together. And I have a feeling that is some foreshadowing, and we're going to find out in the next set of chapters how it's going to go, and probably not very well, given how poorly just the meetings have gone thus far.
Yep, totally agree. That ends our analysis, and this assembly meeting is officially closed. And now we just have our favorite moments to share. So my first one was, of course, when it says Riddick bed hops like a fucking frog, but no, let's give me crap.
I loved when Riddick imitates Violet and Xaden, especially Xaden's part. "It's my secretive nature that attracted you, and why can't you just stay at a hard way for 5 fucking minutes?"
Yeah.
I love that part, dude. That is so fucking accurate. That's basically like the plot of Iron Flame.
Pretty much. But speaking of Riddick again, I thought it was hilarious when he says, "I'm either completely in love with your boyfriend or utterly terrified of him."
I loved in Battle Brief when Devera says, "Whiners don't wear black, read the book and live, don't and die." And I was like, damn, Devera.
No bullshit. See? She's a straight shooter as
She
far
really
as
is.
professors go. So my next one was more romantic, and it's when Violet and Xaden are like mentally arguing, and Violet says he's not my boyfriend. And Xaden in her mind says, "Agreed. That's far too casual a term for what we are."
That's funny because mine is romantic. It's also between Violet and Xaden. It's when he says, "I live by you." And something about that just fucking undid me. I was like, oh my God.
That's what everybody wants to hear, right?
I
You want to
live
hear
by
your partner to
you.
be like, "Fuck the rules. I live by you."
Right?
My next one was also romantic, and it's when Violet is reassuring Xaden because we've flipped a lot of roles recently. Iron Flame, as we talked about, was Xaden reassuring Violet often, and now Onyx Storm is a lot of Violet doing the reassuring for Xaden. So I liked when she tells him, "You're Xaden Riorson, Shadow Wielder, Duke of Tyrandor, love of my life. You have nothing to be jealous of."
I mean, yes, but the context, My last one is when Second Squad takes on Garrick and works together and wins. I just thought it was a really cool scene. I like seeing them work together. I like seeing them use their signets.
Yeah, that was a great set of chapters, like the action sequence of it. And then last but not least, this one was a funny one. And it was when Xaden tells Daddy Atos, "Insulting you isn't against the code of conduct. I checked." Mic drop. And that now is our episode. So thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Book Down Fantasy podcast. As always, we are so glad you found us, so please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and follow us on Instagram or YouTube to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today.
So stay violent.
And we'll catch you all next week. Bye!
Bye! And stay tuned for some bloopers who might have the research they need with, oh my gosh, with a thinking failing.
Aside from that, it seems like It seems like Sawyer.
I know it has something to do with his slow soul. I don't really care about Lynx's. I don't care about Lynx Signet because
descends the steps in a perfectly tailed dark blue infantry uniform.
Tailored.
Second. What did I say?
Tailed.
Tailed. Oops.
That's going to be a good
Okay.
blooper. Unfortunate for Lee. Oh my gosh. We're so close to being done.